o'clock at night
Sure.
or whatever, so might as well plow ahead.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Tonight's special meeting is...
Call the roll and all that? I guess we're going to call it, I guess we'll call it a real meeting.
Special meeting.
Special meeting.
That is true.
So I'm calling to order a special meeting of the Town of Superior Board of Trustees for March 19, 2012, and Phyllis will call the roll.
Okay, Mayor Andrew Muckle,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Eva Gregoris, Trustees Joe Cirelli.
Here.
Chris Hansen.
Here.
Sandy Pennington. Here. Lisa Skumas.
Here.
Deborah Williams.
Here.
Town Manager Matt Magley.
Here.
Town Attorney Kendra Carberry. Town Clerk Phyllis Harden here.
Okay, thanks. Matt?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight's special meeting is discussion with regard to RTD representatives on the proposed Fast Tracks project. We invited representatives from RTD to come and present to the board on the options they're considering for completion of the Fast Tracks project and a possible upcoming vote in November to help fund that project. They've been meeting with a number of municipalities in our corridor and were gracious enough to come down and speak to us as well. So I appreciate that. Here with us from RTD is Chris Quinn and Scott Reed and Natalie Irving as well. And I think John Terra he had mentioned that he might try to make it. He's got another meeting in Boulder, so.
It's a special meeting.
Right, yeah, so. But
Who called that special meeting in Boulder? Do you know?
I read about it in the Daily Camera this morning.
Okay.
I heard about it.
yeah.
Just curious.
So with that, I thought I'd let RTD
Sounds good.
give their presentation and open it up to board questions.
Great, thanks. Welcome. Thank you very much once again for coming.
Thank you. Glad we could be here. I'm Scott Reed, Assistant General Manager Communications for RTD. I'll start off and then hand it over to Chris, who actually knows what's going on, and we'll go from there. And then Natalie, who is the service planner for this area, can answer any questions regarding specific questions about service. So we'll just run through. This is actually the same presentation that the RTD Board of Directors, almost identical to what they're going to get tomorrow night at their board meeting, which is the committee meeting for the Fast Tracks Monitoring Committee. A few things will be added to it. We've been going through this, again, based on a lot of what, as Matt mentioned, we've had a lot of meetings, a lot of outreach with stakeholders along the corridor and with our board of directors as well. So some things have kind of changed as we've gone through this. Is there a...
You use the arrow keys?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the Fast Tracks plan, you're all pretty familiar with it, I'm sure. 122 miles of new light rail and commuter rail is a plan, 18 miles of bus rapid transit service along US 36. That was embedded in the plan. Enhanced bus network and transit hubs are fast connects, so we can connect our rapid transit improvements with our bus system and then morph that system to be a feeder system as we move forward. Redevelopment of Denver Union Station, which is well on its way, about 50% complete now. And 50 new rail or transit stations for transit-oriented communities and transit-oriented development. General stats, we do have 50 miles of new rail line currently under construction or under contract, and the environmental processes are complete on the plan that was approved by voters and as we're moving forward. Now, if we do change anything, if voters were to change to a bus rapid transit network in addition to the overall rail system, we would need to do the environmental impact studies or environmental assessments for those BRT improvements as well. So this is based on the existing plan. West Rail Lines, 87% complete. Denver Union Station, as I said, 50% complete. And the financial plan that we have had before the Denver Regional Council of Governments for the past couple of years does assume a ballot initiative with 0.4% sales tax increase to build out the system on an accelerated basis. If there is no tax increase, the full Fast Tracks completion would not be completed until 2042 or later. The Eagle P3 project, the reason I'm showing this, it has a portion of the Northwest Rail Corridor. This includes the East Corridor, the Gold Line, the commuter rail maintenance facility, and a portion of Northwest Rail to South Westminster. Project funding of $2.1 billion. That is a guaranteed fixed price contract. What's not shown here is $1.03 billion of that is through a full funding grant agreement through the Federal Transit Administration. We started construction in August 2010, and then we started construction on the Gold Line in August last year. The Northwest Rail segment will break ground later this year, with the opening scheduled in 2016. US 36 corridor, 18 miles of bus rapid transit is included on the US 36 corridor. That is being done in conjunction with Colorado Department of Transportation. And the Phase 1 BRT, $19 million of improvements have already been completed, including the bus pullouts at Church Ranch, bus pullouts and ped bridges at McCaslin and Broomfield. And RTD is contributing $138 million for the extension of the managed lanes from Pecos to 88th Street, and about a mile west. That is about a mile west of Interlock, and as I said, that is in cooperation with the Colorado Department of Transportation. As far as our 2012 annual program evaluation, we have to update our financial plan every year and submit that to the Denver Regional Council of Governments. This includes our sales and use tax forecasts, our construction inflation assumptions, and the O&M costs, plus the capital costs. As in previous years, we have gone out to seek help from industry experts and regional partners. We've had the Sales and Use Tax Working Group in operation for several years, and we had the last one in October where we asked people to come and give us their feedback, experts from throughout the area plus industry experts, on what our assumptions should be given what the projections are. And then also the construction inflation workshop was held in November to go through the same type of process to look at what construction projects around the country and around the region are experiencing for their inflation projections and what their history has been with those projections. The three options that were presented beginning back in October when we were working with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and they came back to us and gave us the updated numbers for the Northwest Rail. Continue with the completion of Northwest Rail by 2024, and this again, all these assume a successful sales tax election of 4/10 in this November, and that would match our cash flow requirements, could be completed by 2024. And then option 2, this was based on requests from the US 36 Mayors and Commissioners Coalition that we received on December 5th, which was to continue with that completion of Northwest Rail by 2024 date and accelerate some of the select elements of that project, including some of the stations and increased bus service. And that would have required a delay of the other partially funded corridors by around 6 months or so. And then option 3 was to completely remove Northwest Rail from the Fast Tracks plan and commit the remaining Northwest Rail project funds, capped at $894.6 million, for an expanded, enhanced bus rapid transit system and network around the Northwest Corridor area, which would include US 36, 287, and Highway 119, and that could be completed by 2020. Staff recommendation to the board: following dozens of presentations and discussions, we did recommend what we're calling a hybrid plan to the RTD board, and the recommendation keeps the full Northwest Rail line all the way to Longmont in the Fast Tracks plan, adds BRT service, and helps address the transit needs in the short term through that BRT system. Commuter rail would be phased in incrementally while also implementing that bus rapid transit system. Northwest Rail Line Segment 2, which would be an extension of what is being built by the Eagle P3 project, that would extend from South Westminster to Church Ranch Boulevard by 2022. The bus rapid transit network would be fully implemented by 2020. We believe some other elements of that could come online as early as 2015. Would not delay or impact any of the other Fast Tracks project, and is also dependent on a successful 0.4% sales tax election this November. The near-term capital improvements, I'm going to have Chris come up and talk about this portion of what we'll be looking at for the near term with the bus rapid transit network, and then also go through the program bus rapid transit service plan. Chris?
One of the things we want to emphasize whenever we show this map is that it is in fact a conceptual map. This is a map we developed by sitting down with representatives, staff representatives from the jurisdictional stakeholders. We had a couple of charrettes with representatives. In fact, one of them was held in this very room. Beth Moisky was the representative from Superior. And we mapped out potential routes that the bus rapid transit could take and what type of frequencies would be required to make them most effective. But what I do want to emphasize is this is still a conceptual map. We would have to go through some type of environmental process, as Scott noted earlier, before we would be able to implement this, probably an environmental impact statement. But what we envision, and just to backing up a piece, we have $894 million that we would be able to spend on the capital improvements for the bus rapid transit, which we believe would be able to implement something akin to this. We did a cost estimate, put all the elements in that came out of the charrettes to make sure that they do in fact work. Real quickly, won't walk through all the elements, but what it does include, starting up in the north end of Longmont, we assumed, and again, this isn't necessarily how it would have to be, that along 119 we would have a bus lane, and then stations at Gum Rail, which is one of the planned stations for the Northwest Rail, likely a station at Niwot, and possibly even, we did put it on here, one at State Highway 52 as well to serve IBM, then lastly in Longmont. For US 287, we would assume transit priorities, or we would assume bus infrastructure improvements, not necessarily a full new lane. Those could include bus bypass lanes at key intersections, transit signal priorities, that sort of stuff, and enhancements to the stations along there.
Can I break in for just one half second? So this is option 3, right? Because 287 wasn't in fast tracks.
Option 4.
This is
What-
this is a good question. This is what option 3 would have been, but with the hybrid option. This is starting to sound confusing.
So this
with
is
the hybrid option, this is what we would have completed by 2020. Then with the rail, as Scott noted, to be built in increments from Church Ranch on
Okay.
somewhere in the period between 2028 and 2034. But this would be completed by 2020.
Okay, great.
So it's in addition to. Then just real quick, we put this as kind of an either-or, figuring out the best way to serve between Louisville and Boulder, whether that's along South Boulder Road or along Arapahoe. Again, meaning it as an either-or, since not knowing where the improvements would be the most appropriate in the absence of doing the study. The bus, the existing US 36 project still has an additional close to $80 million that RTD has not yet spent. Whether that money would go to, I think we did receive a letter from the MCC saying that they did not want that to go to the extent from the extension, the current contract to Table Mesa, that the expectation was CDOT should come up with the capital improvements there. But I do want to emphasize that there's also approximately $80 million left over in that budget as well. Oh, yeah, as noted at the bottom there. This improvement also, or this option also includes the extension of the commuter rail from the Westminster station up to Church Ranch, and we'll talk a bit more about why we got to that location in just a second. This map shows the service frequencies for the what we've envisioned, again, with the bus rapid transit. I know, I'm assuming most of the interest from Superior is the frequency that would be coming out of the Louisville McCaslin station, or Superior McCaslin, sorry, US 36 McCaslin, I guess is our official name for the station. Frequencies would be, and it's probably coming out pretty dim there, but the frequencies would be in the 2 to 3 to 5 minutes during the peak period, with 8 to 10 minutes in the off-peak period. So very rich service. Rather than going through the words on this next couple of slides, it may be actually easier just to point to the map. Any of you that have taken the bus in during the peak period from the McCaslin station know that you have a pretty good ride. You get on the bus lanes down to roughly Pecos. Then when you get on I-25, you're on the Downtown Express, which takes you right into Market Street Station. One of the issues that we know that we are aware of, if in fact we were to go to the BRT option, is it works all well and fine if you were going in the general commute direction, so into Denver in the morning, out of Denver in the afternoon. However, this corridor does have a lot of reverse commutes, given the amount of employment that's along US 36 and in Boulder. So for those trips, any buses coming out of Market Street Station or eventually Union Station, they would not be able to use the HOV lanes along I-25 simply because, again, they are reversible and going towards the main peak. Our hope with having the Church Ranch station is that some of the bus trips coming out of Boulder, McCaslin, Broomfield would be timed to hit at Church Ranch with the train, so that if somebody is going back to Denver in the afternoon from anywhere in the Northwest, they could either A, stay on the bus and know that they're going to be stuck in the general traffic when they get to I-25, or they would have the alternative of having a time transfer with the rail so that they could have a more travel time reliability by riding the rail into Union Station. So that is one of the reasons we felt that Church Ranch would be a good destination to get the rail. And additionally, it does fit within the budget we have. By not building the Northwest Rail right away, we have a savings in operations that can be converted to additional capital for the corridor. Basically the next couple of slides just reiterate what I said. Make sure I covered everything there. Yeah. Given our estimates where we are in our financial model, we believe that we can extend from Church Ranch to Longmont sometime in the time frame of 2028 to 2034. We understand, recognize that that is a fairly broad window. Part of the reason for that is based on the fact that we know that there are going to be future negotiations with the BNSF. So we're uncomfortable giving out an exact date for that. And I can't remember, Scott did emphasize this at the beginning, the funding for the extension from Church Ranch, and this also gets a little bit confusing, all of this assumes a successful ballot initiative this fall for an additional 4/10. If that is in fact approved, the extension from Church Ranch to Longmont would be taken out of the original 4/10 that was approved for fast tracks. More funding would be available in that pot of money simply because the other partially funded corridors, the North Metro, the I-225, the Southeast, the Southwest extensions, the Central Corridor extensions, none of those would be tapping money from the initial fast tracks investment. They would be coming out of the second pot of money, presumably approved this fall, which again releases funds from the original pot. Our BRT vision, I'm guessing, I'm not sure what your level of understanding is on BRT, but basically what we're looking at is frequent, reliable service, in service to cover the entire travel markets that would have been covered by the rail, as well as giving us the opportunity to now serve Lafayette as well. Permanent BRT stations, and we do emphasize that to make it known that this is not intended to be a temporary investment. Also, we would include specialized or branded buses and prepaid media, meaning we would have ticket vending machines at the stations so that people could buy tickets before boarding, so as not to slow up the boarding of passengers on the bus with everybody fumbling to get their change in the fare box. And we would continue to coordinate with the stakeholders to establish specific BRT-type bus standards. Lastly, as far as we'll back up. We have had a lot of questions about, well, what if the bus ridership doesn't turn out to be? It takes a while to build in any investment to build up the ridership. What if initially that ridership isn't there? RTD is committed to funding the service levels committed through the first 5 years of operation. From that point on, they would be subject to our service standards, but again, we would put out our service for 5 years as kind of a trial period to see what type of ridership we have, and then adjust accordingly from there. And the intent also is not only for single direction, but bi-directional high-frequency service. Just real in summary, our hybrid option is in fact a hybrid with the hope of being able to, in the short term, establish the bus rapid transit, but also demonstrate the commitment to building the full rail. We understand that we are not going to be able to build that in the original time frame that we had hoped, but incrementally the intent would be, whether it's to build it in segments or whether in one initial construction period we could get all the way to Longmont. But the intent still is to get to Longmont, but allowing additional bus via the BRT service in the interim. Coming up tomorrow night at the RTD Board Fast Tracks Committee, they will make a recommendation to the RTD Full Board, which will be meeting on the 27th to finalize that decision. And then along with that, as kind of a partner effort, we would be approving our Dr. Cog SB 208 report, which is our mandated report that we send to Dr. Cog every year. And our hope is that with the Cog review process, that they would be able to review and approve that at the June, I don't remember the date, their June board meeting. So with that, if that were to happen, then that releases us to be able to pursue whether or not we go to the ballot or not.
Great.
And certainly happy to try to answer any questions.
Perfect. And I don't know if Dr. Terry, if you have any comments you'd like to make?
Why don't I quickly offer some comments? Start by apologizing for being late. I'm John Terr. I'm the RHD board representative for this district, and I've met many of you before. I feel like I'm sometimes married to Andrew because I see him too many times, actually. Also, I know Beth couldn't make it, a family emergency, but she also has been a great staff support and following these issues. First of all, I'll say a couple things. I don't know how many of you have followed the about 2-month discussion with the 1, 2, and 3 options, which had sort of a rail only, then we went, and there was also then a BRT only, getting rid of the rail. So there was a couple of options that were kind of polar opposites. I will say that personally, I have appreciated staff's work and effort to design a hybrid initiative which both addresses short-term needs for our community, for our region, through the investment in the BRT, which I will say it's an immediate opportunity to address important transit service needs for the long term. But at the same time, the rail is a vision that I personally have, and I know a number of folks in this region share, and so want to see that going forward. Now, having said that, tomorrow night's vote is a preliminary vote to say, hey, this framework is something that we would either support or not support, depending on the board vote, to then go through the Dr. Cog analysis process. During that time frame, which you can see is at least 3 months, there would be the opportunity to clarify the details. And there are a lot of outstanding issues that need to be addressed. And I can guarantee you that I am not going to support going to the ballot in 2012 unless we clarify them and get some certainty around what's being committed for our region. So having said that, I think we're in a positive place. I think we've moved forward in a positive direction. Obviously, your feedback's important to me. So I vote tomorrow night, and this is helpful for me to hear from you tonight. But at the same time, I know that there's a lot of work yet to do. So many of the questions you may have tonight about the details are the same questions that we're asking and need to get clarified.
Great, thanks.
Cool. And I will apologize in advance, A, for being late. I already did that. I have another event where I'm the speaker in front of a large audience at 7 in Boulder, so I will have to at some point just sneak out. So I will get feedback, though, from RTD staff on if your conversation goes on further. But thanks for hearing us out tonight.
Yep, thanks very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
coming.
It's a pleasure. It's good to see you again.
You too.
So, questions or comments from the board? Anybody want to start? Trustee Williams, I see you
Sure.
leaning
Oh,
towards
yeah.
the
I've
mic.
been following this for a while. And I'm on Dr. Cog, so annually read that report in detail. So without getting into the details, I wanted to first find out why the options came about, how we got to that point.
Well, we had, like I said, a lot of feedback and input from stakeholders, and wanted to, in through the charrette process and whatnot, to see what we could do. One of the things we heard over and over and over again was, well, you promised rail, and we don't want to see rail go away. Recognition that some of the cost challenges that we continue to face with Burlington Northern, and we went through this process where we paid them $650,000 to do their 30% design, and the estimate that we had a year ago was that $894.6 million. They came back with a year construction figure that would, with all of their expectations, would hit $1.7 billion. That is what started this process. We did the presentations on this to the Metro Mayor's Caucus Fast Tracks Task Force, and they said, we're going to have to take a look at how we can do this long term. We came up with two options. One was leave Northwest Rail as is. The second option was to do the BRT only, taking the rail completely out of the plan. And then, as I mentioned in the presentation, December 5th, we got that second option. It was actually the third of them, but it was the second one that they wanted us to take a look at, which accelerated some of the elements left rail in. As we went through that process, we looked at when rail would be completed with the 2024 timeframe. We looked at what we felt, and this is from a staff standpoint, not from the board, because the board had not been through that part of it until we presented that to them a couple of weeks ago. And we looked at what could we do on an interim basis to provide something quickly on a short term, almost immediate basis, and looked at the areas that required some transportation improvements. Looked at Longmont, what's included in that plan are two different BRT lines that focus there, and then wanted to be able to address, as Chris was talking about, kind of that choke point with the reverse commute scenario, getting into and out of DUS because of that unidirectional high occupancy vehicle lane scenario with the CDOT lanes there. And we kicked this around. We looked at some of the financial numbers and felt that this was a potential good option to, number one, address all those things I talked about, leave rail in the plan long term. We also had some preliminary discussions with Burlington Northern, and that was the first time we talked with them about the possibility of segmenting. We did not ever have that discussion because rail was the full plan. We never wanted to go in and say, well, what do you think if we forget about Longmont, something like that would have been the impression, so that didn't make any sense, and they were receptive to that. We're waiting on them to get back with some specific numbers on that. We've had a couple of good meetings with them. I know there was a meeting with BNSF and the 36 stakeholders. I don't know if any of you attended that meeting, and they were very positive on that. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. We presented it to the board of directors. The board asked us to take some additional time. We had originally planned on having the board vote on that on the 8th. And instead, the board said, let's push that back, have it at a committee level on the 20th with the final vote on the 27th. Continue to get feedback and input based on that staff recommendation, and that's really where we are right now.
So you're kind of working back from June, basically, because of Dr. Cog, I'm assuming.
That is one of the key things that we have to look at. Again, as we talked about, the financial plan does assume that there would be sales tax election this November. We realize that the Dr. Cog process required by statute to be completed. We need that to be completed in a timely manner. I've discussed that with Dr. Cog several times, and they really said, this is kind of a drop-dead date to get that completed by the June timeframe.
And what would happen, or what would be the impact to our corridor if you forego doing the ballot in 2012 and did it in 2014?
Well, a couple things. One would be further delay, the potential for, changes to that. We could continue to work with BNSF. We know that we will ultimately have to go back and negotiate with them. The Northwest rail line is different than any of the other rail lines, as you all know, because we are operating in a freight corridor. We do not have the ability to just purchase that right-of-way, build tracks like we're doing in all the others, and own that right-of-way. We have to have a shared operation. So that would move back that agreement that we have. We would have to go back and renegotiate again. And if we were to delay, then, it would be likely at least another 2 years before we could go to the ballot. All of the data that we have shows an odd-year election is not a good time to go. We're also concerned about the number of ballot issues that are likely to be offered in 2014, given what we've heard.
Okay.
Have you done any preliminary work to see what the possibility of success of the .4 initiative might be?
We have not. RTD cannot expend our own funds on anything related to an election. There are outside groups that will be running the campaign through the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, most likely taking the lead on that. I have not heard any specifics on that. I don't know. We've seen some different municipalities and counties have done their own polls. City of Boulder did one with Cedar Canyon.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Thornton did one.
Thornton did one, and theirs was in around 60%. Boulder did one, and it was in the high 60s.
Of passing?
Yes.
When was that?
That was about 2 months ago. I think it was a couple of months ago. I can get you the information.
How
It was-
about southern parts of the metro area?
I have not seen anything
Yeah.
from that. The other thing that we have heard is, there seems to be like a conventional wisdom that areas that have rail in place will not support that. That was not borne out by the vote in 2004. Very strong support in Arapahoe and Jefferson counties, and a lot of what the polling showed from that time as follow-up to that election in 2004 was they saw the value of the network, the connectivity of having the full system built out. And we have heard very strong support from the economic development groups in the South area for moving forward with that, and that they would be supportive of the ballot initiative as well.
So why don't you, Trustee Williams, finish up with your questions, and then I'll go on.
Okay, one more. So I'm thinking if, don't you just love that one? It just goes right out the window there.
We can come back to you, Trustee
Yeah,
Pennington.
why don't you
Did
do
have-
that?
Yeah, I did. What if it fails? What's the worst-case scenario here?
Sure. If we either do not go to an election or we go to an election and it fails, then we revert back to the plan that was approved in 2004, which is the original plan for Northwest Rail plus the other corridors. And our last projections, and that has not been updated, show that the earliest we could complete the plan would be in 2042. We have not completed the annual program evaluation to get an updated number on that. That's what the last one showed.
Okay, I remember. So is there any kind of past data that could tell you if you make your ballot very detail-oriented and difficult to follow, other than a 0.4% sales tax, period? That's what you're passing. And if there's this option, this hybrid option that you're putting into this ballot along with the 0.4% in order to pass the amended fast tracks, is there data saying that that will be very difficult to pass? That it would be better if you made no options, no hybrids, just straight out 0.4% sales increase?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if it would be just more of a general plan rather than a high level of specificity, or going back to the original 2004?
So what would be more successful? Making the ballot very simple, it's a 0.4% sales tax increase, or it's a 0.4% sales tax increase and this hybrid that we decided on, which is, 5 pages long or whatever.
Sure. Well, the ballot title itself will, have to follow Tabor, talk about what the total amount of debt to be issued and the rate and all that. And it will reference a specific plan that will be adopted by the board of directors on a specific date. That plan will have a level of detail showing what will be included in that. We had an election in 1997, the Guide the Ride election. We had not done environmental assessments. We had not even completed what at that time was required, the major investment study process, which is no longer required by FTA. And the critics were able to exploit that to say, you don't know what you're going to get. So we believe, based on that and then on what we've seen elsewhere, that a level of specificity to show what is included in the plan is the better way to go. Just the so-called blank check scenario that, we're going to raise this and you will get transit improvements, we do not believe would be successful, and that is not consistent with what we've heard from other areas that do want a level of specificity.
So, like in Seattle, I think, didn't they go back to the ballot, back to the voters to get more funding for their transportation? Did they change the plan at all? Or was it the original plan?
I'm not sure.
I know that they did, but I don't know what changed.
If you wouldn't mind terribly, we can't,
Sorry.
just at the mic, just for recording needs, thanks.
I guess the answer is, I don't know.
That's fine. I'm just thinking that making it very complicated is going to make it very difficult to pass it at the ballot. That's my thoughts on it. Why having an alternate plan that you've, put into this new ballot? Why not just forego all that, go with the original plan, and try to pass a 0.4% sales tax increase?
And I have what I think is a follow-on to that. So what you're asking for is, what you want to include on the ballot is a 0.4% increase that gets less service than was passed in the original design. So my question is, what would your ballot request have to be to get the original design by the original timeline?
Well, as we said, if we were to do,
It's corollary.
that is option one, that we say we would fund the full program that was approved in 2004, keep Northwest Rail as it was at that point in time, and we show that with a 0.4% sales tax increase would be completed by 2024.
And what was the original schedule date?
2020.
So that's what I'm asking, what's the,
2017.
Okay.
so what would you need to ask for to get it by 2017? That was my
By
question.
2017.
By the original,
I-
by what the voters originally thought they were voting for?
Sure, I don't think that there would physically be a way to do that,
Okay.
this close.
I don't think it could
That was the
construct it
question.
within that timeframe. Trustee Pennington,
To follow on to Lisa's
I
question,
just want to finish.
what was happening under Lisa's scenario, or option one, just option one by 2020 or whatever, when would it build out, when would option one build out with a 0.4 successful ballot initiative? Is that 2020 or 2024?
2024
Right.
for option one.
Right.
With option
Right.
3, which would have removed completely the rail, we were looking at 2020 on that. With the option 4, the so-called staff hybrid option, then we would be completing BRT by 2020 with some elements coming online before that. We would complete the additional segment of rail to Church Ranch, and that was 2022.
I'm just going back to a clean option one, which seems to be way off the table in terms of what's going to be proposed. But under option one, which is the train, right?
The original.
The original fast tracks, but with the extended window from 2017. What level of bus service comes with that? There certainly was bus service that still would happen. What level comes with that option, or came with option one? And how does that level of bus service differ by the time you get to option 4? Because obviously, Superior, McCaslin, Louisville were a bus transit center. So I just want to know, I've attended numerous of these, and I'm still confused as to the level of bus service.
I'll start that and then I'll turn that over. But as far as what was included in the original, the 2004 vote, what is option one, are the improvements along US 36. We walked through that about the commitments that RTD has made, the current expenditures, and then the long-term commitments on that. Those were included in 2004, plus we've added funds to assist the Colorado Department of Transportation to complete those managed lanes. And then there were expectations of specific levels of service. I'm going to have to turn that over to Chris and to Natalie to give you specifics on that part.
And now, correct me if I get anything wrong. With the opening of the managed lanes, or the extension of the managed lanes past Interlochen in 2015, we would have incremental service improvements to coincide with the opening of those lanes, with programmed improvements each year running up to 2020, with the intent there that the service levels at that point would be matching what was promised in the US 36 environmental impact statement.
That you just described as the hybrid plan? No.
No, and then I know there's just so many things going on here. CDOT and RTD completed an environmental impact statement for the US 36 corridor in September of, I believe it was 2 years ago. That environmental impact statement, since it included the managed lanes, had a bus service plan that went along with that for increase in services along US 36 as well as feeder routes. The intent is that those would be, again, the initial service improvements would start in 2015 to match the completion of the extension of the managed lane, and then they would be almost fully in effect by about 2020.
Can I follow up, though? So if option 4 is selected, is there any incremental positive impact on service at Superior McCaslin over what it is you just described?
In the interim years, no. By 2020, we would have more service along the trunk line at 36. Am I correct in saying that now?
We would increase.
Sorry, yeah.
No, for that time period, we would only increase the service as warranted with the service standards, which we would end up increasing service, looking at the way things are going at this point. We are already looking ahead for the next 2 to 5 years, and we know we will have to increase the service that we currently have. And then as we go into BRT service, there will definitely be an increase in service.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there's no net incremental positive impact to this town in option 4 over what it is we would have had in option 1.
Not any other than is warranted by the service standard.
Okay, gotcha.
Can I follow up that question?
Sure.
Since option 4 would require additional environmental studies, would they cause the 36 improvements that we were just talking about to have to hold up pending those environmental studies?
No. Since an environmental impact statement has already been completed for US 36, that is, I'll never say set in stone, but that is what we'd be working off of as a given condition.
So option 4 is no impact either way, essentially.
We would not be altering or making any changes to what is planned or already going to be under construction for
And
36.
why, I think I just heard that CDOT is more responsible than you are for the completion of that, at least as far as Table Mesa. Is there a date for completion to Table
CDOT
Mesa?
did put out, as you're probably aware, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, CDOT and RTD awarded the contract for the extension to 88th Street. CDOT also put out a request for qualifications to see if there would be any parties willing to do a design bid build to extend that even further from 88th to Table Mesa. I don't recall the closing date. I think sometime within the next months. So that's still a question mark.
So that's at least envisioned by somebody as happening fairly soon, hopefully.
Potentially, yeah.
Trustee Pennington, are you done with your questions?
I'm happy to come back around, so anybody else who has
If they have them,
any.
I've completed most of them.
The Flatirons Rail Station, it gets very little publicity. I would like to know where it is. You can describe it.
Yeah, it would incorporate the existing Flatiron Park and Ride, so the parking would remain where it is now,
To the east of the mall.
to the east of the mall. It then, as you're probably, I don't know if you can envision or not, the tracks are running parallel to, I don't know if it's still called Midway Boulevard at that point or not, but it's a
That industrial road there?
Industrial Lane, or I know that changes name somewhere along there. The tracks are parallel there, so we worked with Broomfield, so we don't know whether that would require a traffic signal there. Likely would. So you would park where you would park now, and then just walk across, and the platform would be parallel pretty much to Midway and the tracks. So.
Can I follow up to that?
Yeah.
So if we want to capitalize on that rail station, that is still part of the plan, right?
That is still part of the plan.
Right.
Yes.
What is the probability of getting bus service from our Superior Louisville Park and Ride to that train station, just as a regular connect?
I'm afraid to answer that one.
And maybe 228 could be incorporated in some way.
Right. With the BRT, as the BRT comes online, and the...
Anyway, I don't care how we do it.
It's, again, we have to look at the service standards to see what the improved service would be. However, the Flatiron is one of the stations where we already have more frequent service than at some of the other stations along the corridor. And from the parking that is available at that location, it only lends itself to be a station that would want to receive more bus service. As we're working our way through all of this, like I said, there's so many details and so many things we still have to figure out, and what's really warranted and what's really needed and what's going to make the most sense, that we're going to end up having bus service, multiple lines stopping at all of the stations. So there's going to be, it's, as far as I can tell from a service planning perspective, we're going to try to balance it as best possible amongst all of the stations along the corridor. So you're not going to have all of the routes stopping at all of the stations. Some of them are going to, we're going to have some service that's going to stop at all the stations. But for the most part, you're going to have something that is equal to what the HX currently does, stop at several stations. The BX stopping at several stations other than the HX. Then you've got the DM that again stops at others. So trying to balance is make sure that all the stations get the service that's needed. Does that answer? So.
Okay. Trustee Skumats?
Process what she was saying.
So why don't you, for the uninitiated, there were a whole bunch of initials that were then just presented. Can you give just a general overview without giving the specifics of what those things are?
The routes.
Yes.
And as for now, this is what the routes are, and this is what we're calling them. As we go through the process, the names might change.
And these are bus routes along US 36
Yes, these are
that
bus
stop
routes.
at different locations at different times.
Right, these are bus routes that are currently in service. So that's the basis that we're working with when we look at the patterns, as we call them. Say this is where the route starts, this is where it goes, this is where it ends. So you've got the AB, which is the Skyride that goes from Boulder to DIA. Currently does travel all the way along 36 and I-70 to get to the airport. That one is slated to actually be changed to go on 36 to Flatiron and then head up the Northwest Parkway and for 70 to get over to DIA to provide better, faster service to DIA for our customers from the north end. And you've got the B group, which has the patterns of the BV, the route that stops at every station, or every stop transfer center, park and ride, whatever you want to call it. The BX, which stops at certain stops within Boulder, Table Mesa, McCaslin, and then heads all the way into Boulder, into Market Street.
Will that BX continue at McCaslin being one of the stops
Right.
in the future, especially with this hybrid plan?
Yeah, and there's two BXs, which gets a little bit. There's a BX that there's stops at Table Mesa and heads into town, and then there's the BMX, which is we just initiated this last run board in January, which is the Boulder McCaslin Express. So we're calling it out that yes, this bus route actually stops at McCaslin because there was some confusion. We had some stopping and some not stopping. There's the B group, and then the BF part on the B, which goes from Broomfield to Market Street Station. So there's a whole bunch of patterns that are already existing in there. Then we've got the DD that travels along the US 36 corridor down to Colorado and services the east side of Denver. The DM, which goes along 36, then heads over on 270 into Colorado to Fitzsimmons, Anschutz, to service the medical facility on the, well, I guess that's also East Denver. To make sure that I don't skip any.
No, I think that's fine. I mean, just the general concept
Yeah.
is that there's different things that stop at different
Yeah.
times along the corridor, and they
Yeah.
might not stop at all the stations. No.
Does that help? Yes.
Okay. Trustee Skamats, anything else?
Totally?
Totally.
Oh, okay. Let me think.
Or we can go, anybody else want to start?
I just was hoping you could
Trustee
explain
Hanson.
one more time the sequence of how the resources would be used. You'd mentioned that the first 4.4% would be used first, and then if the new 0.4% was voted in, then that would be used next, or vice versa.
For the, assuming a successful election this fall, the extension to Church Ranch, that would come out of the new tax to be approved this fall. The extension from Church Ranch up to Longmont, that would come out of the original 4/10 fast tracks tax that was approved in 2004.
And the importance of that is?
The importance of that is the other underfunded corridors, so the North Metro and the extensions and I-225, those would be funded via the second fast tracks funding, the one that would be this fall. So they would no longer be relying on the first 4/10. So that 4/10, after the completion of the other corridors, then all of that would be available for the construction of the remainder of the Northwest Rail. And I say that, and I want to be careful on how I say that, because there is still, that still would be used for the bonding on those corridors as well. So it's not when the construction is completed, then all the money is available, but there is less stress on that pot of money at that point.
Is that also to help with the time frame by doing this little shell game here, or?
It does help with, yeah, that does allow the acceleration of the, if we were relying completely on the second Fast Tracks Fund, then we would not be able to project a completion by 2028 to 2034.
Anything else? Okay, Trustee Skamats.
So, okay, I know this has been asked before, I'm sure, but I wasn't quite ready for that answer yet. So here's my question again. So under options, option one with a different time is what the folks, what people originally voted for and thought they were getting, right? Okay.
Correct.
Under that option and under number 4 option with the new funding, is there any difference in the timing in which the bus stuff happens along our corridor? I know that's
No.
the answer to that. Okay.
No.
Not to McCaslin.
Along just US 36 and that at McCaslin within the time frame, no.
So when would that happen? When does that happen under original number 1, under new number 1, and under new number 4?
It's the same timeline.
Yeah, it would be the same. So it'd be the same, so it'd be starting in 2015 with the opening of the extension of the managed lanes. That's when the first additional service would start kicking in. And then between then and 2020, we would have the full service plan as envisioned in the environmental impact statement.
Which is to Longmont with BRT.
No, at 2020 is when we envisioned that we would have the BRT to Longmont, but the service that you would be seeing in Superior would generally be about, at the Louisville Superior Station would be roughly the same, regardless.
So could I summarize that? If it doesn't pass, if point 4 doesn't pass, or if it does pass, what happens here at our little park and ride does not change except for some of the need-based
Well, the
things you
improvements
address.
from the environmental impact statement, the service plan that was envisioned in that we would not be able to finance that until sometime, I'm not sure when, probably in the 2020s sometime, is when we would see the full service plan go into effect. So
And you're talking about the BRT, not the rail?
that would be the bus service along 36, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Trustee Scott?
It's very confusing, but we're following.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I understand we're talking about a couple of different things here. The US 36 managed lanes, the project that, the contract was just let a couple of weeks ago on that is already funded. And that RTD has put in additional funds to extend those managed lanes to near Interlochen to 88th. The service that will be running along there will be basically what we currently have. We will try to do some type of branding on that, likely at the stations, to show that, this is the US 36 managed lanes. I reviewed a few logos and that type of thing with the CDOT contractor there and with the CDOT Public Relations group. But the full BRT system that we're talking about under option 3 or option 4 is very different than what is included in just the US 36 managed lanes. Now, for Superior itself, the service frequency would remain similar for that, but the travel time would be very different, would be faster with the BRT, full BRT build-out, and the type of service that would be offered, the type of vehicles that would be utilized, as we explained earlier, would be different. They would be specialized BRT-type buses. They would have the off-bus, the ticket vending machines, and it would be a branded type of bus. In other words, to show that this was this full BRT network. So, we're looking at kind of two different parts of this, and I understand, Superior, you were looking at what is going to be going past right out here versus what we are looking at in terms of the entire BRT network with the two different BRT lines, one along US 36, along 119, I should say, from Longmont then to US 36 and then also the one along 287 to US 36. And then Natalie, I think you can explain again on the difference between, the no-build scenario with BRT back to what is currently funded versus what the full BRT system would be. I just want to be real clear.
And along those lines, so while you're discussing that, so the full package 4 and package 3 would be completed, including going to Longmont on 2020, or no?
You're talking about the
whole
full BRT?
The full BRT.
Yes.
2020, everything's built.
That's correct.
Okay.
With the new sales tax.
Yeah.
And if the board approves moving forward with either option 3 or option 4.
Okay.
That's correct.
But without the new sales tax, you would be able to build a limited BRT, or no?
What is funded are the US 36 managed lanes.
Okay, right.
And that goes, again, to 88th, and that is the project that RTD is working on with CDOT. And that is a 2016 completion date. Thank you. 2015 completion date. And so that is funded in the existing plan. What would not be built would be Northwest Rail until 2024, I'm sorry, 2042 without an additional sales tax. And with one of the other options, if we do option 1, which would be just the Northwest Rail, and then would be those managed lanes, that would be completed by 2024 with the additional sales tax. If we were going to do the option 3, which would be just the BRT, that the full BRT system would be completed by 2020. If we're doing option 4, you would have, again, the full BRT completed by 2020, and then you would also have that first additional segment of rail to Church Ranch by 2022, and then we would have the remainder funded again by the original sales tax would be completed in the 2028 to 2034 timeframe.
And I have a follow-up question to that. So my follow-up question to that is, and not to be annoying, but how much of that do the voters get in writing as well? I mean, there was a plan, and there was money, and now there's ask for new money, and how reliable is this plan compared to the other plan? Sorry to be a pest, but...
As I said, the full plan would have to be referenced in the ballot language, and that would be the final plan that voters approved. Going back to what was approved in 2004, when there was the dramatic increase in 2005, a 52% increase in the Colorado Construction Cost Index, the single largest increase ever in that index, plus the economic meltdown that happened between 2007 and 2009, the second largest recession in U.S. history. Those things dramatically impacted our ability to deliver the original plan. So when we look at the...
But that was known in 2005?
I'm sorry?
That cost increase was known in 2005? Didn't you?
Okay, the voters approved it in 2004. In 2005, after voters approved, the Colorado Construction Cost Index, which is a measure of the actual cost of goods and materials for construction in Colorado, went up by 52% in 1 year. And that was not projected by anyone, was not included in our plan. Neither was the big economic recession, 2007-2009 timeframe. We had what we thought at the time was a very conservative estimate based on a 30-year horizon going back, which included 2 recessions, but clearly that was not enough at that point in time.
Just one clarification, though. That it went up 1 year, but has it drifted back down because of the recession? Construction index? Besides construction savings?
Yes, there have been. It has come back some, but not to those original levels. And sales tax, we're collecting now about 40% less than what was originally projected. And that has not come back to anywhere near those levels. Now, we have gone back and dramatically reduced what our sales tax assumptions are, increased what our construction inflation assumptions are, and built in additional contingencies to try to account for that. We've had several people say that we're actually too conservative, that we're going to see things collected more quickly than that, which is a good place to be. So we have made quite a few adjustments on that. Plus, we have completed design at a much higher level. We're at 30% design on virtually all of the fast track programs, which gives you a very solid projection on that. We have about 40%.
And what was it in 04? Percent design.
It varied by corridor. The west corridor was the one that was most complete, the farthest along, and that was at about 30%. The remainder, the corridor is roughly 15%, as a general statement.
And then just one last thing, we have about 40% of the fast tracks projects are currently under contract, and almost all of those are guaranteed maximum price contracts. So there is a level of certainty now that is much, much higher than back then. So, a few things are different.
Anything else? I'm just going to keep going this way. So, Trustees Gomez, anything? Not then, Trustee Sorelli.
Just to confuse the current managed lanes plans right now, is assuming there's no increase in tax or we're proceeding on the managed lanes towards Boulder as we currently plan, will any of that alleviate traffic going west to Boulder in the morning?
There's a little hiccup in it. We can get the bi-directional worked out on the managed lanes, yes. The issue is at Pecos with the narrows, trying to figure out how we can make all of that work. But it should, because the service, the BRT service, in general, the traffic, not the traffic, the travel times should be minimized. And so even if you get past that needle, that fine.
Well, I'm focusing more on if you just...
So you're looking out here?
You look out there
Yes.
and look, say, around from 287
Yeah.
west.
Yes.
In the morning, there's a traffic jam
Yes.
starting about 8 o'clock.
And are the buses in the same traffic? Sorry.
Well, that's my, but I want to know about cars too, because we have cars getting on our interchange and going towards Boulder, and it's a crawl. And will the managed lanes help that in the morning from, say, 287 west? If nothing else is done.
Just one additional item that we didn't mention, in addition to the managed lanes, we're also exploring the possibility with CDOT, and this has been done in other cities, Seattle and Minneapolis, of running a bus-on-shoulder operation. Since part of the improvements, the shoulder will be widened. It would allow us to do is when travel speeds on the general purpose lanes drop below, I believe it's about 30 to 35, the bus would be able to use the shoulder in those instances and
Kick the people out and let them roll, yeah.
so that it would have a little bit better travel time reliability. Obviously, those improvements, though, that would allow for the wider shoulder will only be made to 88th Street, so a little bit of help from 287 to 88th, but not all the way to Boulder yet.
So, because if, our traffic is really easy in the morning until you get to,
Right out here.
actually till you get to 287, or maybe even Westminster. It bogs down till you get to the managed lane in Westminster, between, say, Church Ranch and Westminster. It bogs down, maybe 287.
That's into Denver. all
Going
the way
into
from
Denver,
out the-
but on Denver out, it's pretty gruesome all the way out. So I'm really not seeing a solution to that coming out of any of this, except perhaps the Church Ranch Rail down the road might help that somewhat. But still, you'll have to get from Church Ranch into Boulder. Okay.
Anything else? Trustee Williams?
So this shoulder pull-off that you're talking about, is that called a side loading station? No?
They're just driving on them.
It would just allow the bus. One of the issues that's come up, and I thought of it within the context of your question, one of the issues that has come up is that the managed lane will, in fact, be in the center, and for buses that are making the non-express trips, so if somebody were to be traveling from, say, McCaslin to the Westminster Park and Ride, and there is that type activity, the buses would have a tough time and probably wouldn't, if they're making all-stop service, would not be able to weave in and out, weave into the center lane, then get back out to the individual stations along 36. The shoulder operation would allow them during, again, if there is congestion, and the intent is that it would actually be electronically monitored, so there would be overhead signs that are monitored with the, it's ITS. What is ITS? Intelligent Transportation Systems. I use the acronym too much to even remember what it means anymore. The ITS that they will be putting in will be monitoring travel speeds, and it would actually have a light or overhead signs that would then say buses only permitted in this lane with a green light or a green arrow or something like that. So again, the buses, although they're not, the local buses that aren't able to use that lane can just move along the shoulder for better travel time reliability.
But they still have to exit and
They would still, yeah, but as you recall, as part of the RTD Phase 1 BRT improvements, so we did make improvements via the bus slip ramps at Louisville Superior, Broomfield, Church Ranch, so those operations are functioning a lot better than they did in the past. Also, we have money for transit signal. We're doing a transit signal priority study as well as queue jumps, which allow the buses to bypass the traffic at several of those key interchanges to improve travel time reliability even more.
Trustee Pennington?
Yeah, I'm trying to synthesize here. I am the alternate on Dr. too, so pardon me. That will take at least 10 years to learn Dr. So if I misspeak here, but having attended your presentation at the Omni a month ago or something, it was my understanding actually that you've not been successful in working out any sort of fixed price or guaranteed maximum price contracts with Burlington Northern. And to me, that is the thing that's going to kill this. And I think Lisa's point is extremely well made, that what assurances do we as voters and do we as elected officials have that this is just not another pie-in-the-sky thing that'll move us a little further along, with Northwest Corridor always being at the tail end. And as a consequence, we pay in under every scenario and never get what we're promised.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Northwest, the Northwest Rail scenario is the unique scenario in the entire Fast Tracks program, because we are not able to just purchase the right of way. We will have to partner with Burlington Northern in perpetuity, as long as they own that, and that is kind of the reality we deal with there. The one thing that has come out of this negotiation process, well, several things, is we had originally assumed that we would have a long-term contract that would be paid for on an annual basis, because what we do is we purchase operating windows and specific time slots on a 30-minute frequency for the majority of the quarter, and then 15-minute during peak period for portions of the quarter. What BNSF came back to us with after going through, we paid for that 30% design, is they wanted us to purchase those windows in perpetuity, cash up front. That, again, is a big impact to our cash flow, which is one of the big reasons we jumped from that $894.6 million to that $1.7 billion year of construction scenario. We will get to the point where we can have a contract with BNSF that will be good for a certain period of years. We do know that if we do not have a successful sales tax election, we will need to go back to BNSF to negotiate again before we can open in that 2042 time frame, and maybe more than once go back and renegotiate that. That is one of the things that we're concerned about, obviously, moving forward. We would like to get the additional funding from the voters to move this forward as quickly as we possibly can, to lock that in for as long a term period as we can, as quickly as we can. But as far as the Northwest Rail, that remains an issue. Now, we have been very pleased with the negotiations we've had with BNSF recently in terms of talking about segmenting. They are open to looking at that. We have provided them with several scenarios, as the US 36 stakeholders group that met with BNSF was assured by BNSF that they will look at that they will look at different portions of segmenting. The first was to Church Ranch. They're open to that, but we need to get the specifics on that and specific costs on that. And then what additional segments make sense. Because keep in mind, this is an operating freight rail corridor that is now extremely profitable for them. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, communities not so much, but it is very profitable for them. And we basically need to keep them whole. In other words, if we impact their freight operations, they expect us to pay for that. They expect us to make all of the capital improvements in terms of the rights of way that we do have to acquire to do siding tracks and double track to not impact their operation during the times that they are going to be moving freight, and that we would not be able to increase service frequencies unless we did additional capital improvements and paid more for those operating windows, because again, we would be impacting their freight operations in that corridor. The segmenting can help us with that. Rather than the entire length having to have all the capital improvements on that, we may be able to do that on an incremental approach with the segmenting. So there may be some benefits as far as that goes. That's part of what we're negotiating with BNSF right now.
I guess I don't feel any more comfortable after that answer that, in fact, they're not going to blow up this scenario.
Well, they have been around a long time, obviously, and we've had two different negotiations for purchasing rights of way with UP and with Burlington Northern, and they've been very, very successful. We've done quite well at those. This is a unique scenario. There's no question about that compared to the other corridors within RTD. We have been very encouraged. BNSF has been a good partner in working through this, and it really wasn't until we said we want to get to 30% design, which is the same scenario we talked about before. When we first went to voters with the Fast Tracks program back in 2004, we only had one corridor on which we had that 30% design level, which is really kind of the threshold beyond which you have or at which you have a real comfort level with the financial scenario. Part of it also is when you go through the process, a lot of times the communities want to add things in. We've had that over and over again. West Rail Line was an example of that, where we thought with very logical assumptions, things were added in by the different communities along there. That increases your cost for the project, and then that impacts your financial bottom line as well. So again, where we are now versus where we were in 2004, very, very different scenario. Much stronger confidence in our financial projections, much more conservative financial projections, and much more contingency built into our program.
Can you just say that for the Northwest Corridor? I can see how the rest of it, I can buy what you're saying.
Sure. Well,
but I'm not necessarily confident in terms of the Northwest Corridor.
The fact that we did pay for Burlington Northern to do the 30% design, and that we now have a number from them that includes the basic assumptions that they have for their operating requirements, that they have the capital costs that we will need to pay for, and we have the ability to purchase those operating windows in perpetuity, give us a much stronger confidence level than we have ever had before. Again, we do know that we will need to renegotiate at some point in time. That's one of the reasons why, again, we're hoping that we're successful with a November sales tax election, because we close that window very quickly, and we do have that in place. Then we have all of the capital improvements in place, we have all of the rights of way that we need for that joint operation, and we have, again, those operating windows locked down in perpetuity. So there is a level of certainty that
That
is
renegotiation time frame, though, wasn't that far out, as I recall from the month ago meeting.
I don't recall that specific date. I'm sorry.
It's just an estimate.
Yeah, but the renegotiation window was to me uncomfortably close in, and so.
Burlington Northern said that they wouldn't go past, I think, 4 or 5 years because they didn't have confidence in their numbers.
Right.
So that was my understanding.
It made me uncomfortable. But segueing to a whole nother line of maybe I'm dense here. We have RTD buses right now servicing our corridor. Okay, somewhere along the lines, BRT acronym came into the deal. And at the Omni, we saw around the world, we saw these wonderful state-of-the-art buses with the wide open doors and the flush platforms and all that kind of stuff. And certainly the presentation was beautiful, and I love the woman who came who had helped put these in around the globe, et cetera. What I'm not able to see actually happening, however, is transitioning out of the universe, all these RTD buses, as we now know and love them, and bringing in some state-of-the-art buses, especially when they're coming down a corridor, they're stopping at Louisville, McCaslin here, Superior McCaslin, whatever. We don't have the flush platforms. What's it sounds pretty, but I'm not able to put it into practice as to what this BRT thing does for us, really.
And in terms of service,
Right.
not just attractive buses.
Right. And in terms of frequency of service, et cetera, for our lowly little thing at the Red Bridge here. So if somebody could clarify that once and for all for me, because I thought I heard that really functionally it's not going to change much, even under the best scenario.
Well, a couple of different things. One, if there is, again, all of these are assuming successful sales tax election. If it is either option 3 or option 4, the staff recommended hybrid option, the bus rapid transit network would be built out and stations would be changed to bus rapid transit type stations that would be very similar to light rail type stations.
Including ours would be, we just finished it.
Sure.
We just did it
The
all.
improvements made, I don't mean it's going to be completely
Right.
changed as far as that
Okay.
goes. I'm talking from a functionality standpoint. Depending upon the type of vehicle that would be selected, if it is a lower floor vehicle, then you would make changes to the station loading platforms. You would have the ticket vending machine so that you would have a fare zone area where you would have to have purchased a ticket to be in that area. Then you immediately load rather than having to, currently you go past the driver, there is one door for an entrance and then possibly 2 doors for an exit. You could have a multi-door loading scenario with the BRT buses. And then you would also have the identity for that. That's one of the things that we've learned over time, that there is a demographic that is attracted to light rail because of its certainty. I mean, it's a fixed guideway system. That's what we're talking about with the BRT network, that it would literally be a fixed guideway, a permanent investment that would be utilized by these specialized vehicles for a long-term scenario. Then people become very familiar with that. The service frequency becomes something where they don't even really look at a schedule. I live in Erie, and I take the 120X every day, and it operates as frequently as every 4 minutes during peak period. I never look at the schedule except late at night because I know that there's going to be a bus there. That's the same type of scenario we're looking at with the BRT system, to have that type of service frequency, similar to the Bs now when you have that extreme service frequency around 7.5 minutes, that you really don't need to rely on a schedule because you know that there's going to be a bus there.
Are we
quickly.
going to have that to Superior McCaslin?
Under the scenario 3, under option 3 or option 4, yes. And that is what we are looking at doing with those two. Now, and this is where I know it gets confusing because then we start talking about the managed lanes, which is the funded portion of that. We would not be necessarily looking at specialized vehicles except possibly far in the future as we replace buses. Keep in mind that the amount of the laneage that will have those managed lanes is relatively small, especially compared to the approximately 80 miles of BRT that we're talking about under option 3 or option 4. So there would be improvements, no question about that. And the branding process, though, would likely focus more on the stations than on the vehicles, because you have vehicles that operate on a lot of different routes and then come onto US 36 for that portion of the managed lanes and then go elsewhere. With the BRT network, it's a very contained, self-contained network, similar to rail, where you're operating on those capital improvements along the the lanes there that are permanent improvements, as I said, that would remain in place for the long term, and then you can develop that identity because it is a system and a network that is in place and remains in place long term.
Under option 3 and 4, would, after the 5 years, would the service standard levels change?
We do not yet have a bus rapid transit service standard. one of the things I believe that Chris had in the presentation is that we work with the stakeholder groups to develop what would be a reasonable service standard level. All of our different service levels service types, have service standards, either passengers per mile, passengers per trip. We would develop what would be a reasonable service standard for BRT. We would commit to 5 years after the opening of the BRT system to not subject that to any type of a service reduction, but the potential for a service increase if the ridership warranted that. And then after that 5-year period, then we would bring service standards to bear on that, and we would see what that would be.
I'm going to run through a few questions.
Real quick, because of the service standards, the way we do this on a regular basis when we evaluate a route, 5 years is a long time. Usually we look at a route, if it's a new route, brand new, implement it, we give it 2 years to see how it's doing. And after 2 years, it gets evaluated and gets adjusted to what the needs are, whatever is warranted. That could be increase or decrease. For it to be 5 years is more than twice that length. That is a long time. After 5 years, if a route isn't solid, we've got a big problem. So by giving you 5 years and for letting these routes in this system basically to mature, we're giving you a pretty good base to that this system, that whatever is going to work, after 5 years, this isn't working, then
Okay.
it shouldn't be there.
So let's see, I'm going to run through a few questions here if I could. So I'll start with the service standard. And the service standard is considered to be the delta between the existing service and the new service called BRT, or is it the total service?
It's our guiding document that we use for all services, that we have different classes of service that we look at. So we don't compare the Route 15 on Colfax to the Route 228.
No, what I'm saying is that there's
But-
bus service right now that's not called BRT service
No.
right now. When does it get called BRT service for the 5-year clock to start working? And is the change in the service standard the delta between the existing condition and the new standard?
No, it's actually, the service standards are based on the class of service. So we have the different classes.
Because, as I said, we currently don't have a bus rapid transit
Right.
service.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that the 120X, 122X are very close to that. Technically, the 16th Street Mall Show is too, but it's not rapid. So we have never adopted specific standards. As far as when the clock would start ticking on that would be when the system was open.
So depending on the scenario, so potentially 2020 would be the time that 5 years would then start working from?
Yes, that is our intention. Yes.
Depends on when we go to 2015, if we open the managed lanes and we consider that BRT, then that would be the service standard that we
So
apply.
so my recommendation, if the director was wanting some information, so my delivery on this is that it doesn't get called BRT until it's going to Table Mesa and the whole 36 corridor is built, which under that timeline means 2020, and that 2020 is when the 5-year timeline starts.
And that would be, again, assuming that either option
3 or 4.
Option 4
Correct.
would be approved by voters. Well, first of all, be approved by the board.
Yeah, I'm going to give you
take
that,
over the
right,
voters.
yeah.
Right. So, but as what Donnelly is talking about is, the 2015 with the managed lanes, which we will be working on
Sure.
potential service standards for that.
But that's only going to
that's
88th
separate
Street,
from
right.
option 3 or option 4. And option 3 or option 4, if those were approved by the board of directors, approved
Right.
by voters, then the clock would start ticking on those after 2020.
2020.
After fully opened.
Perfect. So we'd sort of call it BRT in
That's the class to
2020.
review them, yes.
Yes,
And
okay,
real-
so,
real quick, and then
yeah.
that would, BRT would completely replace what we currently have. So
Well, it's-
everything would be BRT after.
So, getting back to the BRT, so it was called BRT in 2004 because it was anticipated it would be a fixed guideway. It would run down the middle of the highway. You'd have center-loaded stations, so you'd never be in traffic, and so you wouldn't have this operational issue. That became so expensive and required right-of-way purchases that it was elected not to do that. But I hate to use the word fixed guideway anymore because the fixed guideway is really not happening because of the change in what was anticipated in 2004.
That's why we reference it as managed lanes.
Right, it changed to managed lanes.
But they're still in the traffic. The bus, the way they call it.
They
DOT,
weren't
not
going to
in
be
the
in
Or
it.
managed
RTD, or whatever, they're still in the same traffic.
Not
Right.
when they're in the managed lanes.
When they get to
Explain
the
managed lane then, because
So
they
man-
don't get it, they sure don't get it.
Yeah, a managed lane
Yeah.
would be open to high occupancy vehicles, so currently that's 2 passengers plus buses, and then toll-paid customers. The CDOT's intent is to have variable tolls, so that as congestion increases, the tolls go up with the intent that that's a way to regulate the amount of single occupant vehicles in there. So the more traffic, again, the higher the toll to discourage single occupant vehicles from using them.
That's what they're doing on I-25 right now.
But on and off is a problem.
On and off is a problem because it's not in the middle, although it was discussed that potentially these could be, potential I think was the word that was used, could potentially run down these shoulders. I assume that this is going to have to be approved by FHWA?
Federal Highway Administration would have to
And
sign off.
when would they sign off on that?
I'm not sure where we are in the process right now. I believe we have officially requested a waiver, but I'm not quite sure.
Because I know we requested waivers in the, around Westminster at one time, and they weren't granted, so I'm a little concerned that FHWA is now going to change their mind, and I would have a hard time recommending anything until I know that that's actually feasibility, because if the buses actually have to transition from the station into the middle of the lane and back for local service, it's never going to work during rush hour. So I guess I'd like to know if you can tell me when FHWA will sign off on that, because I would need that to make an informed decision about what to recommend for these packages.
As part of our follow-up, we can provide you with the data, or with the status of that, since I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And but you think that's, I assume discussions are ongoing about that, is that?
Our reason for optimism are because they have allowed other cities to do it, whatever that indicates. So.
Yeah. So obviously, FHWA is obviously concerned about highway safety, and so, you know, they want to make sure that there's a breakdown lane, and so people don't get stuck in the middle of the, so.
Exactly.
I think it's not just a minor issue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, our main reference was to Minneapolis and Holland.
Okay.
Because that is how they use it. They have a somewhat of a BRT system and using those shoulders in the peak.
And,
But you were aware they've been turned down locally?
well, they had been discussed at one time. It never really got to that point.
Shoulder lanes, I remember the issue at Church Ranch. I thought it was something else to do with the right-of-way on whether or not, and
I think it had to do with the box of the bridge underneath.
Yeah, so there were some other issues,
Right.
as opposed to just strictly running the
Sure,
shoulder.
absolutely. But I guess I'm just drawing from that is that I have a little bit of concern. So running through the numbers, it was $894.6 million capped at the year of expenditure, or that's 2012 inflated?
That's in year of expenditures, so it's inflated, yes.
Okay. And of that, some has already been spent or been committed to, and how much is out of that's been spent or is anticipated to be spent?
Well, there's actually additional money because there is approximately $80 million that's left over from the original US 36 BRT commitment.
Uh-huh.
We have spent, as Scott noted, $120 million went to the RTD contribution at the extension of the managed lanes, and then there was an additional $18 million from what we're calling our Phase 2 BRT improvements that are going for the Table Mesa pedestrian bridge, as well as there's one other piece. The queue jumps at various interchanges. That is also on top of the approximate $20 million that RTD spent for the Phase 1 improvements, which included the Broomfield relocation, the upgrades at Louisville, McCaslin, and Church Ranch.
So there's, my understanding is some money was going to be deducted from the 894.6. You're saying that there's additional money?
We made commitments for the end-of-line station in Louisville. I'm sorry, end-of-line station in Lafayette. Let me try that again. All cities mixed up here. We made a commitment of $17 million for the end-of-line station in Longmont.
Okay.
that would be counted against that 894.6.
Uh-huh.
And then we had about $11 million for some additional improvements along the corridor. So, but the rest of that, the 894.
So roughly 20 million less than the 894.6.
26 million, something like that, 28 million.
And the 894.6 is not based upon 30% construction, right? It's just what was anticipated to be the revenue without an election. Is that my understanding?
That was the 894.6 figure came from the last annual program evaluation for the Northwest Rail. It's what we assumed before we completed the 30%.
Okay, so that was the...
and then they came back with a $1.7 billion number, so that's where that number came from. We capped it right there.
Okay, and the 82 million leftover, what was that anticipated to be spent as? And is that above the 894.6?
It would have to, since it was part of the original Fast Tracks plan for US 36, it would have to be spent within the US 36 corridor. What we have heard, and I don't recall whether this was in a letter from the MCC or if this was just stated at a meeting, but my memory is that what we've heard is that the MCC did not want that any of those funds, that remaining 80 million, to go to capital improvements along 36, or at least for the extension of the lanes, that funding should come from CDOT. So that would leave 80 million open for either upgrades to the station, specialized buses, real-time information, just whatever BRT type amenities the corridor deemed appropriate.
And the 894.6 includes operations capital as well?
That is just capital.
So that's just hard construction then, so not buses and that? Where would the funding
Actually, buses would be included as a capital expenditure, but not the service hours allocated to those buses.
Okay. So then running down the rest of my questions, are there other adds to the election, potentially added to the Fast Tracks plan compared to 2004 in the southern part of the metro area at all? Or is this just completing what was in 2004? The extensions, I guess.
So that would include the extensions, but those, were included in 2004. I'm not aware of anything else, Scott.
So the extensions were in 2004?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have an idea what the average cost of 0.4% is to the average citizen? Any idea? Have you discussed that?
Have we run that yet?
I have.
And once again, I'm not.
I'm not.
If you don't have it, just say that's fine. Just it would be information that I guess I'd like to see. Yeah. And is it anticipated that the Superior Park and Ride under any of these scenarios would be increased in size on the Superior side, not the Louisville side? I know at one time there was some discussion about making it a multi-story facility.
Certainly, so, with the remaining US 36 Phase 1 funds, it's certainly something that could be evaluated.
Okay. And do you know I assume this would be sort of analogous to a service standard. When would you decide that the parking lot would have to be expanded?
Usually when we track our park and rides on a monthly basis for what we call our utilization. Generally, we start paying more attention when they exceed approximately 80%.
Okay.
And that's when we start looking at what our opportunities
At
are.
a peak period?
Yeah.
And do you know what we're at? I mean, I'm not saying, I guess, I'd like to know where we're at, and if you could tell me when
Natalie, do you know?
I think
Superior is at the marketplace. Superior, this is a little different,
Right.
because
Well,
this is in our marketplace.
Yeah,
So-
unfortunately, the numbers we keep are Superior and the Louisville side. They're
Mhm.
combined. So combined, it's at about 89% at this point.
So I assume that with increased service, we'll be doing something, and do you have a timeline when that would occur? And would that be in the 894, or is this in the 80, or where would that money come from?
The 80.
My assumption would be that would come out of the 80.
And when could you commit to that?
That would be available, and It's between the 2015 and the 2020 timeframe. I'm not any more comfortable pinning down an exact.
Yeah, that's fine.
date.
Once again, all these questions are slightly hypothetical, and I just want the answers, and maybe you could deliver it to town staff when you get them. So getting back to the bidirectional service on US 36 at Pecos, do you have any idea where CDOT might be discussing those, or would any of this come out of RTD funding? Obviously, you brought it up, it's a bottleneck, right? And it's going to get worse, presumably.
Some very broad discussions with CDOT on that. One of the fears is, given the constraints by the time you get on to I-25, the right-of-way limitations, that any expansions, either up or out, could gobble up a good chunk of the 894.
I assume it would be hugely
Yeah.
expensive.
And related to that, one of the proposals, and this was a very draft proposal that we RTD had, is would it be possible, and can I use the board? Or,
Yeah, feel free.
I will have difficulty describing it. I can probably draw it faster than I could. Currently, as you're aware...
Can you sort of put the mic that way? Yeah, thanks.
There's the southbound I-25 lanes, the northbound I-25 lanes. Then there's the barriers with the two HOV lanes. And then on either side, there's also a shoulder. We believe there may be enough space to move the barriers, to the center, and then we would have just one lane open all the time. It wouldn't be barrier separated, it would be just paint separated with approximately 4 feet of paint, so that there would be one lane in each direction. However, we have not run any kind of operational analysis to determine whether that would satisfy the travel demands, and also it could seriously have impacts to CDOT's forecast for their managed lane revenue, since part of the managed lane revenues that at the extension are being funded by what their expected totals are.
Right.
So I'm not terribly optimistic that this would work, but it's an idea that we're floating out
Okay.
there.
Well, if there's some discussion about this, I'd love to if the town would be interested in being involved in any of that. So, let's see. I think we talked about that one. The assumptions for revenue, you said we're being conservative, and can you tell me what that revenue would we're assuming that there's revenue going to be going up over the course of time because of inflation and further retail sales tax generation from other retailers, I presume. What's that number that you're anticipating to go up by?
That was right around 12%, I believe. We'd originally had a 6.06%, and we've backed off that to down. It's close to 4%.
And that's been vetted, right, by various groups? I'm just wondering, because I think we are all going online a lot and shopping and not getting retail sales tax dollars. It's an issue for town because people are doing that. I assume that that's going to be a nationwide phenomenon, so I'm very skeptical about aggressive retail sales tax numbers going up, so just as an FYI. So assuming that the revenue is greater or less than the 4% anticipated, what would happen under those scenarios? So let's say less than, what would happen then?
Well, the likely scenario would be similar to what we have now, that it's a question of time. That you have a certain cash flow, and then it goes up and down over time, and then that's why we have the annual program evaluation process to look at what the current scenario is, and then make projections based on that, and then you change your assumptions based on that current reality. Projecting out over a 30 to 50 year horizon is difficult. There's no question about that. That's why I think the annual process really helps us. You're continually baselining that, rebaselining that on an ongoing process.
So getting to Trustees Pennington and Skumatz's, how firm is 2020 and 2022 and 3 and 4? Is that you'll sign? Somebody's going to sign on the dotted line, no matter what. These things are going to be completed.
Left is
And he'll make up the difference.
Yeah.
So, I mean, seriously, though, I mean, what's the timeline? How, if something terrible happens, an asteroid hits, you get my meaning, is that if the revenues are at 1% or 2%, RTD will commit that in 2020 these things would be completed?
Well, it is all a matter of cash flow. I mean, we can't build without the cash flow happening. And you can't construct without the dollars to construct. And that's the scenario that we had when we had the economic meltdown and whatnot.
Sure.
It is something that you attended the BRT presentation, and the sounder person there talking about the sounder transit scenario there, and the same scenario there, where they have had to extend out substantially what they had originally planned based on that, and they are also doing the same thing, potentially going back to voters to build that sooner rather than later. And if, again, there would be some type of economic catastrophe like that, then it would be a question of time.
Right.
We do believe, again, as I said earlier, that our sales tax projections and our construction assumptions and the amount of contingency that we have built in are reasonable, and that they are much more conservative than previously we had in the 2004 timeframe.
Just this leads to my question, then. I think that you're probably aware that U.S. 36 mayors and commissioners would like to have some legally enforceable document that say that this will be completed within this timeline, since we haven't seen a lot of dollars coming here. So I don't know if the RTD Board of Directors is open to entering into that agreement.
We will have to discuss that with the board in terms of their receptivity to that. We believe that embedding this, as we talked about earlier, within the actual ballot language gives a level of certainty on that. Again, to assume that some type of legally enforceable agreement would overcome any type of a financial meltdown,
Yeah.
I think is not.
This would not necessarily be a financial meltdown, but once again, if your projections were off, by a couple percent, it might make a big difference in terms of the timeline, presumably.
It could, and that's again what our what we have been saying is that it is not a question of if it will be built. It is a question of when the cash flow will allow us to build those construction projects.
And if revenue is higher than anticipated, what happens to that revenue?
Then they can be built sooner.
Assuming that you can have construction firms available to do construction.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. And you mentioned about the rail maintenance facilities have been located. I just don't remember where they are. Is that in Westminster? I just don't remember.
Yes, Westminster has offered I want to say 30-acre parcel just north of Church Ranch.
And that's for commuter rail and BRT facilities?
That would be just for the rail vehicle maintenance.
Okay. And is that construction cost in this 894?
Yes. Well, not in the 894.
Or some of this shared at all, or?
It actually wouldn't come out of the 894. It would be coming out of the Northwest Rail budget, not the bus BRT budget.
Okay. Let's see, you talked about the service standard. Let's see, so in terms of the resolution that's in our packet, and you talked about, somebody talked about this as well, about Fast Connects. Can someone describe what they are and how they operate?
Yeah, the intent of Fast Connects was to set up more suburban transfer bus connecting centers. In the case of US 36, I may defer to Natalie on this, but I think it's geared more towards areas where we've had less rich service. But
for the Fast Connect transfer center locations, Westminster currently is one of those locations that would actually qualify under that. Broomfield Park and Ride actually qualifies as well, because we schedule the buses to meet at certain times at both of those locations. Table Mesa is one of the locations where we have so much service in the peak where we don't schedule the meets because
they're just there.
It's just there. Just like, I don't know if you guys have been I-25 and Broadway, the light rail station and the bus service there. There is so much service that then we don't actually schedule it, it's just there. But those are locations that we consider Fast Connect and transfer centers.
Okay. And that's between bus and bus and bus and rail?
Yes.
Both of them?
Yes.
Okay. And then describing how our residents would get to various points in town. So I've had the chance to ride to the airport. Didn't go, wasn't the R of BRT. So how would the new service look like? Residents leaving here, going to the airport. What would that look like?
It's the Route AB currently provides the DIA service, the Skyride service from Boulder, from this corridor to DIA. That service, most likely the frequency would increase. It currently is an hourly service, and it would most likely increase to a half-hourly service as we go along. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at changing that routing to go along the Parkway and 470 for faster access, because the travel times along I-70 are absolutely horrible.
Right.
And this is really supposed to be the Skyride from the north end of town, the northwest end of town, from Boulder, from this corridor. We would change that once the rail piece would come into place, so that those folks that are south of Flatiron to Westminster would have the other option for rail to get to DIA once the A line or the line to DIA is built, which is what, 16?
Yes.
Yes, it's 2016. There's actually a good chance that at that point we would switch it over, that the AB would change the routing, and we would just say, hey, you have the connections to DIA. You know, you can take the bus to Union Station, Market Street, and so forth, and take the train to DIA.
And this is
So
in
you
the...
would eliminate that, the AB?
No, the AB would just change its routing, but it would no longer serve Westminster, for instance. And Westminster would say, hey, you know, take the express bus, the BRT, or whatever, get to Union Station, and then catch the train to DIA.
So if that's presuming option 4 were to occur, and then the rail went to Church Ranch at that time, then you would go along.
Could transfer at that, yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask another question about the AB? So you mentioned that the frequency would increase. Would the length of time also increase? Because it stops in the evening, and if one's plane comes in late, one pays $90 for a cab back here.
Yeah, so length of service hours, not the actual time of the trip.
Right.
The
That's
span of
what I'm talking
service. We have looked at that, and I know we've gotten requests for that. But right now, as I look at the service standard, that is not warranted. That is not to say that in the future that doesn't become warranted.
So the current service standard, just in general, is an X percentage of a bus or whatever is filled. Is that what a service standard is?
To add bus service, if we have what we call a fully seated load, and the average for the over-the-road coaches is a 55-seat load, when that is exceeded on a consistent basis, we look into adding service.
Okay. All right, thank you. So in terms of the rail construction to Church Ranch, how much would Burlington Northern require in terms of purchasing slots or an easement? Would they require the entire purchase up to Longmont just to have service to Church Ranch, or are they open to segmenting the purchase of the slots as well?
We don't know that yet. The original assumption for the Northwest Rail Corridor was the entire corridor. We did ask them at one point in time, well, what about building it in phases, and opening in phases, with the intent of constructing the entire corridor, the entire rail line over time? And the answer at that point in time was, well, you still need to do all of the capital improvements before you can open any portion, which makes sense. It's kind of like you've got a garden hose with water flowing through it. If you constrict any part of it, you mess up the rest of it. So putting a passenger rail in the middle of their freight corridor would impact their freight operation from one end to the other of that corridor.
Right.
So that does make a certain amount of sense that you would have to do all of the siding tracks, the double tracking, all of that, the entire portion to not impact their freight operations. Now, that was back when we were assuming that the only thing that would be done is the full rail line from DUS up to Longmont. Now, with the possibility of looking at segmenting that and possibly doing that in segments, we have asked them, and doing that in different increments, we have asked them to take a look at what could be done along those lines. And they are going back and doing an operational and a financial analysis to give back to us to say, if you went, as I mentioned earlier, what the different segments would be if you went from, Church Ranch to Louisville, and I'm making these up, I don't know, and from Louisville on up to another segment. What would be the impact to their operation? What would be the financial impact? And what would be the requirement for RTD to pay for that? Plus, what would be any type of a service improvement along those lines? We expect to have those back within about a 60-day period to have some answers along those lines that will give us a level of certainty that we feel comfortable with. And we have had BNSF ask us some additional questions and have had good give and take on that process, but it is not completed yet.
And it seems like that might be pushing past just looking at the next steps. That seems like that's coming to you after June. Does that sound fair?
We think it will be within that same time frame.
Okay.
And when I said 60 days, the clock started ticking a few weeks back. It was shortly after, about the same time as the meeting with the US 36 stakeholders in BNSF, which was about 3 weeks ago.
Seems like, yeah.
So that's going to be very difficult for the RTD board to make an informed decision on March 27th.
They will make a decision based on the information that is available at that time, and the other part of that they will be doing is sending that specific plan to Dr.Cog for the financial analysis, as we talked about earlier. That has a big impact on our ability to move forward with a potential election, is that Senate Bill 208 statutorily required process that Dr.Cog has to engage in each year to approve our financial plan.
Okay. Well, I know that this will be coming to Dr. Cog and US 36 mayors and commissioners, but if any of those communications, when you have identified that, if you could forward that to staff, that would be helpful.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I know you had a list of questions that you put in a letter that
Yeah,
was sent to RTD.
right,
We
so-
received that this morning.
Yeah.
So we're, some of these things, we should have that, we have most of those answers compiled. We did email those late this evening, so you don't have those in front of you, so we're answering those as best we can, but there is a substantial amount of additional information that will be coming to you that can specifically answer, I think, almost all the questions that you have there.
Great. Thank you.
And have you sent that to town staff?
Yes.
Okay.
But that would have been probably about 5:30 or so, and I know that.
And I'll just apologize because I sent it to Beth, on Saturday, say, please forward this to you, so you'd have some time, so you had at least, 3 hours to look at it or whatever.
I actually went to Albuquerque to watch the bus play, so I missed that.
I saw you there, I'm sure.
11,000 of our closest friends, yeah.
Did you take a bus?
No, I drove, actually. It became a bus. I had my 2 sons in it. And, it's fun.
Let's see. So some of this is just when you'll know if what's going to need to be double tracked. I assume that that's part of that same discussion with Burlington Northern at the moment.
Yes, and again, that'll be the sequencing scenario, which segments come online, which don't impact their operation, and exactly how that will all work together.
Okay. So when will you've talked about the various technology issues, but when will the prepaid boarding that's not necessarily needed for BRT, when would that come online?
We are looking at what the appropriate time to implement that would be with the managed lanes. That's one of the scenarios we're also looking at, if that makes sense to have that ticket vending type scenario when the managed lanes come online. We haven't, I don't believe we've come to it.
Actually, we have some additional information there. US 36 Commuting Solutions did submit to CDOT for a faster grant, which was in fact awarded for TVMs along the corridor. As part of the construction project, CDOT and RTD will be installing conduit for fiber optic. We don't expect that to be available for the machines until a little bit prior to opening, so we were envisioning probably placing them out there at about the time that the lanes themselves open.
2020 or
So that'd be
2015?
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that would include the whole corridor even past, just for a clarification.
Up
that
to
would
Table
include
Mesa.
Up to Table Mesa.
Even without
Yeah.
the lanes, right?
Yeah.
Got it. And I think all those are discussed. So tell me how Louisville Station is going to work if there's not a train there. Do you have a...
It's hard to say at this point. We would envision it to be a BRT station. We would expect, and we haven't done an in-depth modeling analysis to determine exactly what the ridership would be, but we would envision relatively similar ridership or station boardings there. So same park and ride configuration, with the hope that if and when the rail comes, we would install the platform and then convert it to a rail station.
And that's the same for Gun Barrel and the
Yes.
other things along the diagonal. They'd be
Along
BRT
lines.
stations and then converted to rail.
Well, in the case of the diagonal, Gun Barrel would be the only station along the diagonal.
Okay.
Only rail station along the diagonal, and then, of course, Longmont is the terminus.
Okay, so under these phases of 4, in terms of I think that you said it'd be in the 2028, 2034 timeline when you think the rail would be up to Longmont within your modeling period. So those stations, what would happen to BRT, I guess, then? Because in 4 there was enhanced BRT going down Arapahoe, South Boulder Road, yada yada. Did that go away when those stations are built?
I would envision, yeah.
Now, if you're referring, there's two different things. So the BRT would be implemented on top of the current service, for starters. So whatever service is there on Arapahoe, on South Boulder Road, the BRT service that would be implemented would be on top of what's currently there. We wouldn't touch that. That wouldn't change with train, because that's an east-west connection. That's different. The north-south connection, so service along the diagonal, we would have to look at, and we would have to evaluate it, and again, look at the service standards and say, hey, does this really make sense? Now, we had all this BRT, we had, service every 5 minutes. Well, now that the train's running in the peak, does that make sense? So we'll look at that. Might end up with a little less bus service, might stay right about the same, and have to see how that's going to work out and what the ridership numbers are.
Okay. Thank you very much. And once again, I didn't mean for this to be the Spanish Inquisition here, but I just wanted to make sure that I was able to lay my questions out. So thank you very much for doing that. Appreciate it. Additional board questions?
I have one. I have been asked this question so often, and I've asked people this question often, trying to get an answer. How much has the Northwest Corridor paid into Fast Track since 2004 under the original referendum?
We can go back and try to get that. The state collects sales taxes. RTD does not. And under the new financial management system they have, we have previously asked for individual municipalities' amounts, and they have not been able to give us that. So I don't know if the state is able to provide that to you or not.
Okay.
We could probably do some type of a rough estimate. Keep in mind also that, and we've heard that before, some people asking about what has been included. And I think tonight we did a good job of explaining all of the different elements that have been paid for along the US 36 corridor by RTD for the managed lanes, for the other commitments that we've made. Keep in mind also that there is a 1% annual increase in rubber-tired service, bus-type service, that is embedded in the Fast Tracks program, which has allowed us to keep service levels where they are, which has allowed us to not make some of the cutbacks that we have had to make over time, or would have had to make over time had that financing not been there. And a lot of that service has remained in this area.
Well, you're with me on this one. In order to have a successful initiative in November, asking for more money of this corridor, this has, I believe our residents in the Northwest Corridor are very aware of this issue. I think they're going to be reluctant to pay more unless they are educated as to what they've already received and what they will receive. And as I'm totally with the mayor, if there is any way to assure them that the future monies that will go into this will be fruitful to the Northwest Corridor, I think you'd be well advised to do that, because otherwise we're left here having history as our only guide, which is to say, we were promised one thing and we didn't get it. And the general populace doesn't understand what they have gotten, so I would suggest you put that out to us. And then any assurances we can have that what we're paying into the pot will be used for our own benefit.
Sure. Well, and keep in mind, as you all know, I mean, it is a regional district, and we do provide service throughout the region as best we can. And as I said earlier, that it is at this point in time a question of time. The system will be built out. The question before voters will be exactly what that system will be and exactly what time. If voters think that 2042 or later is okay, then that will be their decision. If they think that they want that sooner, which we believe that they do based on all the input that we have had, then that will be in their decision as well. And the other parts of it are that the improvement that will be made along the northwest area, whether it be only rail, whether it be only BRT, or a combination, will again be ultimately decided by voters. So we do want to provide as much information as we possibly can. We want to provide as many reasonable assurances as we can, and we want to be sure that the financial plans that we have in place, again, are conservative enough with enough contingency that we can, again, based on that much higher level of design that we have now than we did in 2004, be delivered within that specific time frame.
So based on what you're saying, I'm assuming that the ballot language is going to specifically call out the Northwest Corridor, and the option that has been whatever RTD approves, the board, is that, so that's the entire region is going to be looking at that saying, oh, we're changing just for the Northwest Rail or the Northwest Corridor. Should I be voting on that or should I not? How are we going to make that ballot language be more inclusive for the entire metro area so that everyone realizes the monies are going for the entire area, not just the Northwest Corridor?
The Northwest Corridor, depending upon what the board selects, will not be singled out per se in the ballot language. What the ballot language will likely say, and again, it has not been finalized, the board of directors will have to adopt that, but going back to what was approved by voters in 2004 in the specific ballot language, it in general spoke about the Fast Tracks plan. It referenced the specific plan that was approved by the board of directors on a specific day, and it was about a 40-page plan, if I recall. So clearly, you could never have that level of detail in a specific ballot language that would be approved by voters or put in front of voters, but there is a level of specificity regarding the basic elements and talking about the amount of debt, the rate of sales tax, and some of the specifics of the plan, but clearly that level of detail could never be included in a specific ballot language. Now, the challenge will be for whoever runs the campaign to put all of that in motion, because again, RTD, just like the town of Superior, could not spend any public funds on an election campaign per se. The level of specificity that will be included in the plan, I think, will be very high, but again, it will be referenced through the ballot. The ballot title will reference that specific plan that will be adopted by the board at a point in time.
So your explanation actually kind of solidifies for me that going with option one, which does not call out any corridor, which gives the voters the original 2004 Fast Tracks plan, and just asking for more money in order to build out that plan seems to me a lot less complicated for voters to vote for. And what I would consider already, it has been approved by the voters. So it would, with one's assumption, it would be probably more likely to pass in that realm.
So this brings us to item number 5 on our agenda. So we might, unless there's other questions of how this all looks, we probably should have a discussion. The town's been neutral on any of these discussions and has remained that way. Question for the board tonight would be, has any of this swayed anybody's opinion that you want to have an active, I assume that would be lobbying for option 4, the hybrid. I assume would be high on your list.
We are not lobbying for anything specifically. We were asked to come and explain.
Yeah.
And that's what we
RTD staff,
tried
I
to
mean,
do.
you, in a global sense, the staff of RTD would prefer to move forward with the hybrid version, I
That is a
presume.
staff recommendation pending approval by the board of
Yep.
directors.
So, Joe?
If I understood all of the potential ramifications correctly, managed lanes into Table Mesa we're going to get regardless, but they're not really going to completely solve our problems of going west to Boulder in the morning. I may be wrong about that, but I thought I heard that. So I'm thinking that to solve that problem requires some kind of rail option at some point in time to alleviate traffic going towards Boulder any time of day. So if I'm correct in those assumptions, then I would say that I'm not neutral and I would like to see some kind of rail option supported. And so either option 1 or 4, I think, is what.
1, 2, or 4.
1, 2, or 4, but I'm thinking 1 or 4.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about it?
That does, 1, 2, or 4, does solve that traffic?
One is the original, one is accelerated station development by pushing out 6 months on the other ones. And 4 is the
But it
hybrid
doesn't-
that we talked about.
But it doesn't help the traffic going from Superior to Boulder, only
It
by
does.
maybe getting some of the people from Westminster on.
Off
Off the road.
36.
That's the only way you're going to solve that.
Nothing direct.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm correct about the managed lanes and how they work, predominantly coming out of Boulder in the morning and going into Boulder at night.
It depends on how many people are in the Lexus lane. I guess we don't call that anymore.
No.
I think the only potential for alleviating traffic is at some point having people get the option of taking rail into Boulder. And so that is then not a neutral. I think I'm not neutral on that. I think I'd like to see rail come in through one of the options, and I'm not sure which of the options at that point is.
To get
And
rail
it does
to,
go through Boulder, though? I thought it only stopped at Longmont and didn't go to Boulder.
No,
To
it will
get-
go to the Boulder Transit Station.
to get rail to Boulder, it would be 1 or 2. I mean, it'd get to Boulder in 4 as well, but in a delayed time frame.
And then on to Longmont.
Then on to Longmont, yeah.
Okay, so 1 or 2 is then what I would favor.
Okay.
And Scott and crew, feel free to correct any of our assumptions here if we're
Because I'm
wrong.
very suspect of being wrong, what I just said.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about it?
I already said my thoughts.
Sam
And
again.
you know
though.
where I'm at.
1 or 2.
Okay. I'm certainly not neutral. I believe, I actually would like to, once again, bring to everybody's consciousness the train station at Flatirons. I think that Rock Creek and much of Superior will feed directly into that and thereby use it. I think it will be a great regional asset. So I, too, am interested in, my primary interest here is in rail access. And I like some of the things I'm hearing on the BRT, but in fact, with the build-out of the the managed lanes that is already in place. I can live with either one or two as well. So I'm not neutral, and I am pro-train, and so let's keep discussing and see where we settle.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts about it? Chris, do you have an idea?
This has been an interesting experience tonight, but I'm still unsure of what direction to go. There's a lot more information here to study up on, but I'm still not convinced that rail line is going to benefit the town of Superior, or how much. So I still stay neutral and want to look into this more.
I tend to agree with that. But.
And I have to admit that I'm a rail fan, but I'm not trusting right now. So.
Yeah, the problem
You're
is...
not what?
Trusting that that we can go to the voters and have any kind of guarantees at all. And we'll be asking for more money, and who knows what's going to happen in 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever years. So.
I think it's going to be hard for people to swallow the, going from 900 million to 1.7 billion. Part of an election, just for this corridor. So, I guess from my perspective, the town of Superior is going to get basically what we're going to get. There will be some nuance around that. Going to the airport maybe a little sooner than otherwise we would on the Northwest Corridor, but otherwise, we might move enough people off the highway with rail going to Boulder. I guess I'd be surprised. I mean, I think the things that people talk about are moving a few percentage points of people off the highway with mass transit compared to not having mass transit. So I'm not sure it's going to solve any congestion issue. So I guess that's why I've always been neutral on this. Rail corridors can certainly lobby for whatever that they feel like they want to get, but town of Superior is going to get what we get because we're just along the corridor, and that's what happens to us.
And when you move people off the highway, don't the people who used to drive on the back roads to avoid the highway now move on the highway? And,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan of mass transit. The problem is that we live in the West, right? So we don't have, this isn't Washington, D.C., it's not New York City. We don't have huge demand to go to a point from other high-density locations, and so it doesn't work quite as well here. So, I mean, I love taking mass transit when it works well, and I think RTD should be commended on running a very fine system. I mean, they've been awarded, obviously, being very high-quality transportation district, but it's just difficult here.
I think there are two things that are really important to bring back to the RTD board. And one is honoring what the voters wanted in 2004, what they've already voted for. And two is honoring the alternative transportation here other than BRT. In other words, a multimodal transportation opportunity for our corridor, not just bus. There should be rail and obviously bikes and whatever else. But in other words, true multimodal, sorry, catcher there. So I think for me that's those two issues. They're very, very important, and that's why I'm obviously not neutral. I'm for the voters and for what they already had voted for, and what I think is going to pass in 2012 is something very simple, something that is not confusing to the voters, and that is just a simple 0.4% sales tax increase and not all this, hybrid this, option 2, 3, 4. I think that it's very difficult for voters to understand what they're voting for.
So
those are my thoughts.
Just to wrap this up, I'll entertain a motion. We have a resolution in the packet if anybody wants to support something.
Well,
Justice
before
Gomez?
that, so I actually really like the kind of commitment that you asked for from the Mayor's Association or whatever it was called. Sorry about that. And, people get held to the fire all the time, and there are suits and whatever if they don't meet those obligations. I don't have a problem with that.
And
So,
it just seems odd that we would take a position on this, and it seems like we'd be the least affected by this when all the other communities that are more affected haven't taken a position yet. So it seems like it would behoove us to wait
And
learn
from
a
the,
little more.
you know, from the, I'd recommend, this is one of the times when US 36 mayors and commissioners hasn't agreed on things. I think that we're trying to come up with some idea of where everybody could get to. I'd be a little circumspect. I mean, it's not going to make much difference one way or the other, but I'd be a little circumspect about having an official position without having commuting solutions and US 36 mayors and commissioners being able to fully weigh in on this, so I tend to agree. But
And I suggest that we send a letter to the RTD committee for tomorrow night and the RTD board as well, and whoever else, all the mayors in the corridor, and just CC them. But I think that we need to at least state some of our positions here, because we do have a majority here that we want what the voters want. At least everyone has mentioned that. I think that there's some key things that we could at least put in a letter that we should be doing. And forego the resolution, because we don't know all the costs yet. There's obviously going to be more costs with the BNSF, correct, in another 35 days or 45 days. So that could put a huge kink in things.
So one position would be to wait to get some more information. I mean, this isn't going to, you know, RTD Board of Directors, I'm sure would have, if we had strong feelings about something while they're analyzing this, I'm sure that they would like to have that information. So,
Well, and one of the important things to note here is RTD should not be eliminating, the board should not eliminate anything. They should leave it as open as possible when they make their decision on the 27th, and especially the committee and what they recommend to the RTD board. So if they're going to, you know, go with option 3 where they entirely eliminate the rail, I want to put the brakes on that.
Right.
well, the problem
So-
is that I think they have to recommend a plan to be analyzed in the Senate Bill 208 process, so they
Correct.
can't be amorphous.
I actually don't want to shy away from putting forth a viewpoint here. I mean, we're out alone with fighting Jefferson Parkway, and had we not been, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today with that. I don't have any great attachment to this resolution. I actually like the letter, the idea of the letter that actually talks about the viewpoints that are very important to us. For example, if in fact option 3 were the recommendation that the board adopted, or in fact option 3 were the recommendation of the whole rest of the corridor, that doesn't change my opinion that option 3 is not the option that I believe serves anybody best. And I'm happy to state that, and if I have a majority here, I'm happy to go along with that majority. I think Deborah makes an excellent point that I'd sort of like to reiterate, and pardon me if I'm just repeating, but to the extent that any referendum language or initiative language, whatever it's called, calls out the Northwest Corridor, because the population centers that have already gotten part or all of what they want are larger than the population centers that haven't gotten a darn thing, right? So to the extent that language, that ballot language, calls out the Northwest Corridor in any way, shape, or form, the chance of this failing because the population that says, oh, well, we've already got what we want, why would we increase our taxes to pay for something up north? I think that's a possibility, and I think it could possibly derail this whole thing. Anyway, so to the extent that I want to strongly encourage that ballot language be crafted very carefully to maximize what the voters originally called for, which is a metro area, a regional transportation build-out. And the fact that we got the short end of the stick or the short straw or whatnot and happened to be the last one being built out should not put us in this situation. The fact is, either we are committed to the whole plan or we're not. And if we're not committed to the whole plan, tell us right now, reduce our taxes right now, and don't have us pay more into it. And then make it a 3/4 metro region plan, and just have 3/4 of this population base build it out. So, I'd be very disappointed if we didn't take a stand on this and didn't put our foot down as to what we're willing to tolerate. And I do believe a letter can go further, perhaps, than this resolution in putting those points, that are unique to us and unique to the Northwest Corridor forth for consideration.
And that letter could just simply state that, we are for what the voters voted in 2004, and we are for a multimodal system.
And I got to say that buying kiosks to buy tickets at and having people come in through 2 doors instead of 1 isn't worth 0.4% of the tax base. That's just crazy.
But what could conceivably happen in this ballot initiative in November is the rest of the metro region says, forget it. We got what we want. You guys wait to 2042 to get what you want. And, that's very annoying. And, I mean, for us to have any long-term confidence in RTD serving our needs up here, RTD's going to have to you have a lot of work out there to do to rebuild that trust up here.
Yes, please.
I hope, again, as we made the presentation earlier, it was clear that there are elements throughout the RTD district that have not been completed as part of the Fast Tracks plan. The lines that were built originally, we had the Central Corridor line through Denver that was built with local funds, 5.3 miles. We built the Southwest extension down to Littleton. We had a $120 million federal grant for that, an 8.7-mile line. And then the T-Rex project, which included light rail there. Those are the projects that have been built outside of the Fast Tracks program. If you look at the Fast Tracks map, there are still elements throughout the area that still do need to be built. And so we do believe that a regional initiative as far as the ballot process is one that needs to be undertaken. Clearly, the campaign group who will do the educating of the voters on this, I completely agree, do have their work cut out for them. But I think it's also important to remember that most everybody has some skin in this game because of the fact that things still are outstanding in other parts of the metro area. Clearly, the Northwest Corridor, being the longest one, has a lot of municipalities involved in this, and that's why we, again, think that trying to do things sooner rather than later is extremely important, not just for this area, but for the entire region. And we're hopeful that the voters understand that.
But, Scott, am I correct, no matter how you slice and dice this, let's say we do get the extra 0.4, we up here still are at the tail end of the line. We are still the last thing to be done.
If you look at the BRT elements, you are one of the first things to be done.
Yeah,
that is why we
I can see
came
that.
forward with option 4 to give an almost immediate transit improvement to this area. That is why staff made that recommendation to avoid that scenario, keeping the full rail plan, the full commuter rail plan, the full line in that plan, and then doing the initial segment which helps address that choke point, as Chris Quinn mentioned there.
Mm-hmm.
So I do disagree with
that's a good point.
Scenario that you're talking about.
So if we want to hedge a little bit here, option 4 you're putting forth helps us hedge our risk up here that we might end up with nothing.
I think if we're just being completely parochial, the best thing for us is option 4. But I guess I try not to have a completely parochial viewpoint on these things. Another option would be that we could wait for more information and then, RTD staff, RTD board, the committee, I guess, will make a recommendation for the RTD board for the following week. We could give information to the board in between that time, it's not necessary for us to put it in with that
Passing a
timeline.
resolution tonight going to impact?
I don't support passing a resolution.
I agree.
Okay.
I support sending a letter to their committee for tomorrow so that they have more information when they make their recommendation to the RTD board.
I'm sorry, what would your letter consist of? What would you say in your letter?
I'm not going to sit here and craft a letter at the
Well,
moment, but
Somebody's got to-
someone's going to have to, and it's going to be town staff. But
Generally speaking, what would,
generally speaking, I think,
Are you in support of going to election in 2012? I mean,
as long as that does not call out the Northwest Rail or the Northwest Corridor, I think putting forward an option is the wrong way to go. I think expressing our concerns in certain viewpoints, we want, true multimodal, we want what the voters want, we want
but do we know what our residents want? Do our residents want
This is-
our rail?
we're talking about what the voters voted for. That's what we do know.
But yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
It's one of
How do
those
we break
things
it
is
out?
that, this is also why I've been neutral. I tried to have town have positions where it directly impacts municipal operations. And otherwise, voters can just decide what works for them.
How close was the vote in 2004?
It was 58 to 42%.
But Boulder County was higher than that, as I read in the
Yes,
paper.
Yes.
Boulder County
Yes.
was
Yes.
60.
Mid-60s? That's what, I thought 63 or 65 is what resonates with me at this point.
I
So
agree.
we were actually more in favor of it than the general populace.
Yeah, I could certainly see Louisville, Longmont, and Gun Barrel and all that along there voting for it, for sure.
And now what?
Or Niwot, yeah, but I don't know, I just.
So the things, so thumbs up or thumbs down, did people feel like they should go to an election, barring the specific language, for in 2012? I mean, are we, as a town, in support
I
of
don't
that?
I don't think RTD has a choice. Economically, I say it's a bad year, but the fact is RTD has acknowledged this dilemma. I totally am upset that this dilemma exists, because I think to have it go up from $900 million to $1.7 billion this close to the 2004 vote is, I'm dissatisfied with that.
So that-
And still not settled.
So
Right.
I think there was general consensus, not complete agreement, that maybe 2012 is a good year, so that's something that we would recommend. I think that we would recommend full build-out of bus rapid transit along the US 36 corridor. Is that-
No, I don't recommend that.
You wouldn't build out
No,
BRT?
I recommend what the voters voted in 2004, and that
Okay.
is the BRT
BRT.
corridor, but that is not a full build-out of BRT. It wasn't,
That is a full build-out.
It's a
of
full
BRT.
build-out of BRT.
not what the 2004 Fast Tracks plan is.
It's not the full build-out in option 4.
Just in terms of the bus.
Okay, what was approved in 2004 included 18 miles of BRT service along US 36.
With center access.
That was, so it was, that was in the pictures, but
Right.
there was the asterisk, like, assuming it could be completed, I believe, something like that, in terms of the
So
language.
There's, and when you talk about full BRT build-out, we're talking about two very different things.
Correct.
If you're looking at the entire, bus rapid transit network and system that we're talking about, either in option 3 or in option 4, which includes areas that were not part of the 2004 vote, which includes US 287, Highway 119, and then the western parts of US 36 that were not part of that plan. So I just hope that
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
clear.
so I mean, I
think-
guess what I was
Different
saying
things
is
we're
that we
talking
would want the full build-out of the 18 miles along US 36 corridor.
Which
Okay,
is
that's
option 1,
that.
or option 2,
I-
but not option
Or-
4.
I don't want to see
for it.
BRT built at the expense of rail.
Right, so that, I'm trying to get to some sort of letter that staff could write. So those
There
are
you
two
go.
things that we generally agree that would be helpful, right? and a component of rail of some form, which would either include up to Church Ranch early or the other ones, one or two. So basically what's getting at, we don't recommend three.
We don't recommend 3.
That might be the only thing that we have gotten to.
I would agree.
That's safe to say.
So it's safe to say that we all do agree that we feel rail is an important component along with BRT.
And so if we got, we've eliminated 3. So then it just being completely parochial, then if we accelerate construction, that means option number 2. There wouldn't be any downside to.
Or
going
4.
Well, and
Yeah,
I'm against.
I'm just at 1 and 2 right now.
I'm really very against recommending any options because I didn't feel that we should be at that point where we ever had to choose an option for our corridor because it's not our place. It's the voters' place. And
They'll be voting on it.
that's right, but they already voted. So why are we crafting on the fly what we think they all want when we already
I'm
know
trying to
what
get to
they
some
want?
letter. If you want to write a letter,
Okay,
we
but
have to
I'm-
give staff some direction.
It's going to be very difficult to, in my opinion, to be, saying, oh, we're here for option 1, 2, and 4. It defeats the purpose of what
That
the
sounds-
message is.
Totally fair. I just want to be sure that town staff knows what they're going to be doing. And without that direction, then we should just say,
Well, it
it'll
is
be
very,
neutral.
no, it is very significant. If a majority of us feel that option 1, as voted on by the voters, which had its component of rail and its component of bus improvements, et cetera, still is what we should honor, we can say that.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is that if you're going to pick between 1 and 2, let's be slightly parochial and recommend 2. So,
What
how
is
do people feel about that?
What
So-
is it?
So once again, out of those 2 options, number 2 impacts Superior sooner than the other. Yeah.
2 and 4 do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if we want to send them a note that in general we, once again, recommend the build out of the 18 miles in a component of rail, and in general we favor options 2 or 4.
Well, I would go with option 2 with that analysis, and the reason for option 2 is recognizing that we have a higher probability than anybody else of getting the shorter end of the stick. That in fact, for the money we are paying into this, we would strongly encourage some investment sooner rather than later in this area of the region.
And so I'm just being making devil's argument here, but so if you were then thinking, well, what would make the most sense for town residents? Well, what do our residents do? They go to the Bronco game, they go to Denver Union Station, they go to Boulder, and they go to the airport. And if you want to get to the airport on Northwest Parkway sooner than later, I believe that that's option 4. So, just so people are aware.
Why isn't it option 2?
Option 2, I think, and correct me, I'm just trying to remember all these timelines. It seems like that operationally the Skyride analogous bus service from Boulder would happen sooner in 4 than 2. Is that accurate? And I certainly might be wrong, but
From a service planning perspective, we wouldn't want to change the routing until we have the line to DIA in place. Once the line to DIA is in place, we would be willing to go ahead and make that change.
and would be completed.
2016.
So, in either option 4 or option 2 of these, would that make a difference? No. So by 2016, we'd have that operation to the airport from, okay.
We would be looking at.
But just for more clarity, the augmentation of the AB to use Northwest Parkway, how time-sensitive is that? Is that what you were just talking about? 2016? No sooner
It
than?
would serve Flatiron Parkway.
Okay.
So, do people want, if they feel strongly that we should send them direction, then let's do that, or we can just, once again, leave it totally up to the voters without weighing in officially as a municipality.
What answers to our questions are we waiting for that would change your opinion?
I don't,
Because there were a lot of questions.
There was a ton of questions that
I
there
know.
was no answers for.
right.
Well, Andrew, I would, this doesn't answer Joe, it goes back to your previous analysis to say that what services does a typical resident in Superior use? Yes, currently, because there is no easy way to catch a train where you need to catch a train to downtown Denver, of course, none is taken. However, if Flatiron's station would be built out, I would hope that anybody who works down in that central core or along anywhere that train goes would leave the car at home or park it in the Flatiron station and start taking it. So right now, I think our user patterns are probably as you described, but this whole metro build-out is premised on the fact that we're going to reduce vehicle miles traveled, et cetera, and then capitalize on a either BRT or train system that is put into place. I mean, otherwise we can forget all of that.
Well, and I'd be buying theater and symphony tickets that I don't buy now because I hate the idea of driving Denver to dark.
And parking downtown. So I feel strongly that, I can go for any option that involves the train, but when I go to metro areas, I take the subway, I take the train, I take the public transit, I build it into my trip, and I would hope that the long-term consequences on the Northwest Corridor and Superior, even though we're not going to have our own little Louisville bus station or whatnot, the one at Flatirons is plenty close for me. I agree with Deborah's analysis that multimodal is the way to go, and it opens up a lot of opportunities.
I guess I could support a letter supporting option 2. A little bit of something for us, but also including the rail.
Okay.
And I see no downside to supporting the rail. I see no downside to supporting the tax. If it passes, we'll get everything faster. If it doesn't pass, we're no worse off than we are now. We're going to get everything way slower.
Okay. So I think we're at option 2.
That was
I'm
what
good with 2.
thinking.
Okay. So I think that we have
Anybody?
direction, I guess, or if you want us to write a letter or whatever, basically the town board's in favor of option number 2.
When does this have to be drafted by?
Tomorrow.
I think you convey the sense of it, too.
Yeah, convey the sense, and Matt can draft a letter if people are okay with that general thing, then I will sign it after it's drafted and send it that way.
So if you can use that to sway all those other governments out there, those localities who have not gotten off the dime, please feel free to.
Our concise logic should be
Yeah,
compelling.
well, we'll see what happens, because Boulder County is going to support option 3, so.
Actually, I
And
support
Matt, could you
option 2
send
as
that
long as we get a call.
On to
back.
us before you send it.
So,
I will.
all right.
Thank you for
the letter
spending your evening.
Yeah. The letter in general,
With all of
the
us.
first paragraph is that the town believes that in multimodal service is important, that rail is required to be part of that, analyzing the impacts on Superior residents, something along those lines. It appears that option 2 would be in our best interest. That sounds.
But Andrew, it does annoy me, and if our Boulder County Commissioners are listening, we just, had a lengthy discussion on this. I have not who is Boulder County considering its constituents? And how are they formulating their opinion?
World Tour, I think, is in the meeting.
The other meeting, correct.
I mean, I certainly might be wrong, but I think that the commissioner's viewpoint is that it's hard to swallow $1.7 billion for rail. I get that. Totally get that.
They don't see the long
And
term.
just
Long Island Railroad.
thought you would want to know that this has been taped, and so it's on our website, and if any of the RTD board members want to watch it to see what our discussion was, please
Yeah.
direct them that way.
So, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. Once again, it's been very helpful for you to answer these questions. I know you have a very unenviable position trying to sell this, and God love you for doing it. I really appreciate it, and thank you for coming to our town.
And thank you for explaining things in detail, and it was very helpful.
So are you going to come up with 2 more options come Wednesday morning?
Hybrid 2.
We really thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you on this, and great give and take. Really appreciate the questions. And again, as I mentioned, I think we do have answers to
Yeah.
that. I did look at my BlackBerry, and I think it was emailed like 5:48. And so
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's in the room, and I think it did go to Beth. So
Yeah.
I don't think that Matt was copied on that. We'll be sure that it is sent to you as well.
I'll get it.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you for all your hard work. Really appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else to come before the board tonight? Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you.